area as the Desolation of Smaug, didn't he?
Yes, and it's on the map.
Yeah, right. So
all the verdant agricultural bits they had around Dale, all fried, all gone. I'm ready, sir. I'm ready, sir. Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to theonering.net. This is Torn Tuesday. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, Hobbit, lasses, and lads, and all of our friends all around the world who want to discover more of J.R.R. Tolkien's works. And through the popular culture of New Line Cinema and Peter Jackson putting out a 6-film series of Middle-earth movies covering The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, we, as a movie-going public, were gifted with one of the most extraordinary things to ever hit our collective ears. And that would be Howard Shore's magnificent music and accompaniment score for the 6 films. Let us take a deeper dive. Today, you are joining us for The Hobbit, Part 2, The Desolation of Smaug. You can join along with us. We'll have a countdown clock available that lets you know the elapsed time of the film. This is the extended edition. Please, everyone, get your Blu-ray player ready or your electronic streaming service ready and go right to the pause button at the beginning of the screen before the clouds appear and the Warner Brothers logo. And we'll let you know when we count down and begin. We're framing this discussion with the undeniable gift. I'm the beneficiary, especially. I, Clifford Broadway, as your host. I'm so glad to have with me Jim Ware and Doug Adams. And Mr. Doug Adams, as well, known for the Lord of the Rings music. It's called The Music of Lord of the Rings, the original title, correct?
Lord of the Rings films, but that's okay.
That's right, Lord of the Rings.
No one gets that last word anyway.
I'm telling you, having worked so closely with Mr. Howard Shore and been right up there up front, Jim putting together the material with Doug together for this upcoming music of the Hobbit films, which is yet to be published. We'll get to that later on. So you guys, welcome aboard to the OneRing.net. We are about to begin very, very soon. Before we begin, sir, Doug, isn't it true that this film score is seriously, by far, introducing more new themes, more new music per square inch than any of the other 5 films?
Yes, it's true. If you simply sit and run the numbers, there are more new themes in the Desolation of Smaug than in any of the other Hobbit or Lord of the Rings films.
Mm-hmm. Indeed. Jim, I know you probably have a full inventory of that, don't you?
Well, if we're looking at themes that were explicitly named as new themes and sketched as such by Howard Shore, it's 14. But if we look into the score in a lot more detail, there's a lot more than that.
We're going to explore Beorn, the shifting sounds of Mirkwood, and then we'll eventually get to the Lonely Mountain itself. But there's Lake Town in there too. There's Toriel. There's so much going on in the score. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we should begin. I'm going to hear from Mission Control. We're going to begin the countdown in about 10 or 15 seconds. Ladies and gentlemen, get your popcorn, and it comes in pints. My filtered water comes in pints. And
yep. Coffee comes in pints too.
Very good. We're set to begin. This is the extended edition of The Desolation of Smaug. Will begin right when our countdown comes through. Listening for Justin's cue. Let me know when. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Begin.
And here we go.
Anybody notice the shape of that dragon and that cloud on the left?
Did you ever decide if that was on purpose?
It must be. I've looked at millions of other Warner Brothers logos. There's no dragon-shaped cloud, not even the faint abstraction of one. But there is here. Also noticeable in An Unexpected Journey, there's a cobweb within the eye of the lion in the MGM logo.
Really?
It seems to be that the effects folks were making a slight jab at the legal claim that MGM still had to the Hobbit property, making it look dusty and old with a cobweb within the lion's eye.
Scuba Steve, a music major in Modesto, is watching along. That's kind of cool. We have a voice in our ears that you can't hear. Good morning, or is it, what time is it for Steve?
No, that's the Shire theme over there.
Got a little bit of the Shire theme, and before that we had a little bit of material that's sort of vaguely related to Thorin, but here we have a theme that we haven't heard since Fellowship of the Ring. This is the theme that Howard used for Bree.
Here's Peter Jackson again.
Here's Peter Jackson still eating the same carrot, eating very slowly. But that was a bit of material that wasn't necessarily strictly thematic in Fellowship of the Ring, but because it came back here, we now can give it the title of a theme. Maybe not a major theme, you're not going to hear it again, but it's kind of a cool way that happens a lot in the Hobbit films.
The scale, the physical scale of Thorin against the other humans of Lake Town is very effective in these shots, I must say.
Yeah, the scaling never doesn't work in these things, I find. It's really quite effective. As we're doing this, I should also mention we are going to take some questions tonight. We'll take them live. So you can get me, I think the Facebook, if you're watching on Facebook, you can put the questions right there and Justin will feed them into our ears. If you're on Twitter, you can DM me tonight. I got my DMs open and I am Doug Adams Music on Twitter, or you can use the hashtag Hobbit Score Questions. We're going to try to watch that. And I do actually, no, there's no theme for the carrot. The question was, does Peter have a carrot munching theme? I'm sorry to say he does not. That'll be in the Silmarillion. He'll be a timeless creature.
Here, that was here in this scene. The bald fellow is Bill Ferny Sr. He's the father of the infamous Bill Ferny, who makes such a presence in the Fellowship of the Ring when Frodo is there at the same time. Whoa, Gandalf has suddenly appeared, but there's no Gandalf theme.
Not yet.
As originally written, this did have a unique variant of Gandalf's theme where you heard the two phrases in reverse order.
That's right.
So you heard the second phrase of the theme before the first, but I don't think that actually
made
the final mix.
No, but that is a trick that Howard likes to play with on occasion. He did that with some of the Galadriel material in the original Lord of the Rings, where you kind of take the first half of the theme, second half of the theme, flip them around from one another. We do actually have a question that came in my direct messages that we can maybe tackle right at the outset here. A question about Desolation of Smaug score would be, how challenging was it to make this movie's score, knowing that it was the middle movie in the trilogy and had to tie into the first and third movies? I might argue that, at least in terms of creativity, this was the easiest, or at least the most open, I should say, score for Howard to write. It was, we'll get into, there's some important material in here, but it was really where this story came into its own, so there wasn't so much of an attempt to tie it back to Lord of the Rings in terms of, you see Rivendell again, you see Galadriel again, you see Saruman again. It kind of established its own personality here. So I think in terms of being a free, open, creative field, it was the one that he had the most leeway with. So we're getting back into some of the battle music here, yeah?
Yeah, this is our first little bit of extended edition material in here.
Right, yeah. If you haven't seen extended before, this is new to you.
I think this flashback was originally a little bit longer as well. There was a little more of the Azanul-Bazaar thematic material in here.
There was. I think some of that was this change in actor for Thrain. I think I saw some of the earlier version of that. So we get into a theme here that's going to be a really central theme for Thorin and for the dwarves in the score, which is the the House of Durin. I always go back and forth on title. But the House of Durin is sort of the main company theme in films 2 and 3. And it's the theme that I mentioned last week that you sort of hear hinted at the beginning of the very opening titles to Unexpected Journey.
We did just get a little bit of that reversed Gandalf theme as well.
Yeah.
Oh.
Which is not quite where it's supposed to be, but not far off.
I personally find the addition of Thrain and all of the extra plot and all the diversions about that story, about that dwarven ring, I find that intensely satisfying in this film, in this extended version of this film.
It's a great performance too. It's a nice performance.
Yeah, there was originally a little more to it as well, but we can talk about that when we get there.
Such pathos to that bit, yeah.
So we're going to get into the main titles in a moment here. And this time the title card is going to come up accompanied by Smaug's theme. And there used to be a family of instruments or an ensemble of instruments occurring beneath that theme. It's not used here, but it does come back and score quite a bit. And that is the gamelan, which is an Indonesian ensemble. It's not a single instrument. There's not an instrument called a gamelan. It's an ensemble. And it's got a lot of sacred properties to it and therapeutic properties. And, you know, it's a very important element of Indonesian culture. It's an awesome sound. If you ever have a chance and listen to a recording of a gamelan ensemble, it's a really unique sound. They use some different scales and pitches and things like that that give it a completely unique color. But anyways, it sort of represents this metallic percussive element to Smaug, the kind of representing him, his armor, his lust for gold, his just, you know, immensity and all that. So it was originally here playing sort of eighth note patterns beneath the Smaug theme that you hear under the title. It's not here, but you will hear it a lot later in the film. I thought we could talk about it a little bit early on so you're ready to hear it.
Indeed. It's one of my most favorite moments over that title. Exiting the Prancing Pony would be Dallas Barnett, our friend in New Zealand who played Bill Fernie Sr. A shout out to him. And
all right, I get a nice birthday message from him every now and then.
He's an awesome fellow.
He is.
Now, 12 months later.
So those little pair of you know, two percussive hits, that's an element that carries over from Lord of the Rings, that Footsteps of Doom figure, just that boom, 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 boom. That's a very simple figure, but one that carries a lot of dramatic weight in this story. More in Lord of the Rings. So here we come to Smaug's theme. This is the furnace chords, and then the thematic version here, this is what we call Smaug the Terrible. There's kind of two Smaug themes, and there's sort of the pitch material. One of them is headed forward, one of them is headed backwards. It's what we call in music a retrograde of the material. It's not precise. It's not like they take the entire series of notes and run it one direction and then the other. But at the beginning of the theme, they do have the same pitches, run one direction and then the other direction. My first of the evening, why is the Misty Mountains theme not in this score? It's a very popular question. I think we got to that one a few times last week, but I will just repeat very quickly that they thought that was the theme kind of for the first leg of the journey. So once they got, you know, past the pine trees into the Misty Mountains, they largely left that theme behind. So it shows a little bit of dramatic progression. So that was the thought. Some people love it, some people don't, but that was the idea.
It's starting to get a few little hints of Bayon's material in here now.
Yeah, Bayon's material is it doesn't really have any big, straightforward, you know, gigantic statements in the score, but it does certainly have like some of this loping material in here. That's eighth note pulse in the strings, or
Does the Warg Pursuit right here mirror any of the music we hear here in Unexpected Journey of the same Warg Pursuit?
No, this more plays to Bayon.
Okay.
So that's, as I've said, that's often a what's up for consideration in film scoring is from whose point of view does the music come? You know, is it sort of an omniscient point of view? Is it related to a specific character? That was the big question about the film version of Thorin walking down the tree there at the end. You know, the music is meant to attach to Azog, but people assumed it was part of Thorin, and there was confusion. So that's film scoring in a nutshell. It's a very complicated consideration artistically.
Indeed.
So we get our first slice of extended edition music in a couple of minutes. So unlike Unexpected Journey, the extended edition scenes for Smaug were, for the most part, explicitly scored with new material, much like the extended versions of the Lord of the Rings films.
Right. Now, much of what we're seeing here was actually still a part of film one when this was a 2-film project. Film one really went up until the barrels. I think you would sort of get a shrouded appearance of Bard at the end of film one, and that was your cliffhanger there.
Mm.
And this all ended up in film two when the films got split differently.
Mm. So some of the material we hear in this film was written much, much later than some that we hear at the front end, correct?
Yes, although the stuff that was written later was the stuff that was written in sort of the more typical time frame. Some of this material was written the year before as part of Unexpected Journey. I mean, of course, that doesn't mean everything you hear in this section of the film was already composed, because certainly this was all stretched out. The Mirkwood stuff became much, more detailed and lengthier.
I have to admit that Beorn is kept as such a mystery because either you get an extremely tight close-up of him, or you get a very distant shot of him on the rooftop. And getting a sense of Beorn's huge power is not quite, it's a mystery until later in the third film, I think.
Mm. So we're coming up to a piece here titled A Necromancer.
It is.
So
it's not made clear the relationship that Balg and Azog are father and son, but the musical relationship is made more clear. Right?
Yeah, exactly. I don't think they wanted to get into the reproductive habits of orcs, so they left a lot of that uncovered, but probably all for the best, yeah. But you are going to hear some material coming with this necromancer stuff. Well, I guess let's wait on that. We'll get into that in a couple minutes. We can finish off with everybody waking up here at Beorn's house. Some classic Howard Shore divided strings and cluster writing. If you've ever taken, here's a little bit of, this is what I was talking about in the last one, where he really just reduces the ring theme to 2 notes. You can just sort of hear that. Yeah, that the sharp 4 going to 5, and you have enough to reference the ring. It's really very subtle and very wonderful.
It is. I heard that again today.
Yeah. A lot of what Howard does harmonically, he, if as I'm going to say, if you've done any beginning piano, you probably know some triads, 3-note chords where it's like a C, an E, and a G, with the stuff we all learn in very early piano lessons. Howard likes to use clusters of notes, which means they're not spaced out where there's a note between them. They don't have, stacks of thirds or stacks of fourths. They're basically, if you just sit down and hit all the white notes on the piano at once, that would constitute a cluster. Now, he's not doing it as sort of willy-nilly as that. He is choosing carefully which pitches he's going to use, but he likes that type of harmony. So there's a lot of material in here. We're going to get a bit of Azog's theme, but of course we also get the Necromancer, the Dol Guldur skip beat, which is close to the Mordor skip beat, descending thirds, things like that. A lot of the classic bad guy material from these scores shows up all in one little composition here. And if you can't hear it in the film, listen to it on the album. Sometimes the mix doesn't always help you out.
True.
So we'll try and point out where things are on the album where we can, but
some of the descending thirds right here.
Things did move around a little bit. Yeah,
when we get to the last act of this film, it's going to be, we have to do a lot of description.
Indeed. And
we're going to get into the House of Beorn. That's the composition title here.
With the giant bumblebees.
Yeah, that's right.
Yes. One of my favorite things that actually was visually brought over from Tolkien's description. A lovely slow motion of those elegant horses. And the Southern Alps. Hello. Now, such an extended scene, if you've never seen this before, fans are watching this perhaps for the first time. There is all this material written in the book with Tolkien's playfulness on display, making a light joke about how the dwarves are introduced to Beorn 2 by 2 by 2. And suddenly, you realize that a serious character like Gandalf is ready to play along with comedy. And it's really a lovely moment. It's really gorgeous. And unfortunately lost in the theatrical version.
Yeah, it's a lot more music here as well. I mean, the original theatrical version was, I think, about 5.5 minutes of music, and this is 9.5.
Correct me if I'm wrong. I don't think. Scene. Yeah, this didn't make the album either, did it? The extended stuff is not on the album.
It did not. The album has an edited version of the theatrical piece.
Yeah. So you'll notice here that some of the music, as the dwarves are introduced, is similar to the music. It's a 1, 2, 3, stepwise pitch combination, but it's similar to the music that you hear as the dwarves are introduced in Bag End.
Oh,
we didn't quite give it the title of dwarvish introduction music or anything like that, but there's certainly a similarity in approach and just playing with this little 3 stepwise pitch thing. So if anybody has perfect pitch, listen for B flat C D or C D E separately, and you'll hear some callbacks to stuff from film 1. And I think I have another question coming in too. The question came in about something later in the film, referencing a scene that was not in the final version of the film and whether or not Howard scored that. I don't think off the top of my head that any of the unused scenes that fans are aware of, I don't think any of them was completely scored. So I think no. I did see the scene in question here is the Gandalf finding the Palantir in Dol Guldur. I did see that scene, but I don't believe it was scored at the time. When I worked on these films, I guess I should repeat some of what we talked about last week. When I worked on these films, it was always October the year before they were, the year that they were released. And since these things were edited and effects were finished and scoring is finished right down to the last second, I often saw I always saw early incomplete versions of these films. So I saw a few scenes that didn't actually end up anywhere. And for example, everything I saw, Beorn still had blue eyes. I didn't realize he was going to have brown eyes until the film. And I don't know if that was a last second decision or if they hadn't completed the effect or what, but he still had blue eyes when I saw the film.
We'll come back to that Palantir scene later.
Okay. That's hours away. Here comes some of the similar material to Bag End introductions. You also hear some callbacks to similar types of music that you hear associated with Hobbits. Some of these little like that little syncopated string thing, which is a very Howard Shore device to begin with. Mm. This is probably, Jim, you can let me know if you agree with this, but I think in these films, this might be one of the longest stretches without any major thematic things going on.
It probably is, yeah.
Yeah. He's usually calling back to something. Now there's Thorin's theme, so now we're back into leitmotivic stuff. like he would spill a lot of that milk.
The ability to make Beorn's home look lived in and all organic and natural and filled with abundance is it's the set designer's dream come true to make this place look like
True.
this.
Jim has reminded me of something too, so we make sure that we do definitely come back to the Palantir question later, because there is more to talk about on that. It's not, Jim, it's not the same version that it was original, but yeah, we'll come back to that hours from now. Someone remind us, please.
Absolutely.
This scene always makes me feel hungry. I feel I need snacks here.
Do you have any snacks?
I'm sure I can locate some.
Okay. Should everybody pause your movie while Jim gets snacks?
As noted earlier on my Twitter feed, at QuickBeam 2000, I had reminded everyone that scenes in the interior of Beorn's house, like that right behind Thorin, you see a chessboard, and that confirms the existence of the game of chess in Middle-earth. Also,
chess and golf.
Oh, I know.
Yeah.
Too many real-world analogies in this.
We're getting back into the thematic material now. We had a little sniff of Mirkwood, the Woodland
Right.
Realm.
Right, yeah.
And some more Necromancer material there.
Oh, it's so faint.
There's a very subtle theme in here. It's not used very much in the score, but we call the syncopated pattern, which is an extrapolation of the Erebor theme. It's, again, one of these things that's hard to point out while we're talking over the film, but there is another bit of material in here, and sort of subtle references to Mordor, the threat of Mordor material. So that's coming up as they reach the edge of the forest. Actually, Jim, maybe this is a good spot to talk about. We could talk about the High Fells, which is coming up a little bit later, and that was one of the scenes that we mentioned last week had been replaced. That was originally happening almost concurrent to the dwarves leaving Rivendell.
Correct. So when this was originally 2 films, instead of disappearing off to the High Fells at this point, Gandalf would have gone to Dol Guldur, having already been to the High Fells earlier on.
Yes.
But having the High Fells coming up in this part of this film, Howard had scored that scene when it was part of Unexpected Journey. When he came back to do it here, he kept a lot of that material, but he introduced a new theme he had written titled The Nine. And you're going to hear the first bits of that coming up here.
There's Royd Tolkien in the background. There he is.
Yeah.
Bringing the sword.
Playing Rangers. So we got a little hint of the Nine in there. And that's a theme that is now associated with the High Fells sequence that wasn't in there when Howard made his first attempt at that, or first pass at that in the first film. So maybe it was all for the best that it got relocated. We got a new theme out of it.
It strengthens that ring wraith connection in somewhat more subtle ways than having a chorus.
Right. Yeah. Pretty quickly here, we're going to start getting into Mirkwood material.
Indeed.
There's a little Erebor. this doesn't is technically self-promotion, but it doesn't get me any money, so I can do it because I don't feel bad about it. If since I can't really describe the themes or play them over the film, if anybody has these extended editions with the documentaries, there is a wonderful music documentary that they worked very, very hard on, and I was very fortunate to be asked to come in and do some yammering and do some piano playing, and I can actually play some of these themes so you can pick out what it is I'm referring to. And we even notate some of them on the screen. So if you want a little bit more clarity after listening to this commentary, that might be a good way to go. I do not get royalties on my documentary appearances.
But an excellent resource to look for.
Yeah, it was a ton of fun. It was really nice.
Yes.
In fact, we did the entire thing on a unused bit of set from one of the X-Men movies. So I'm sitting on a giant X from the X-Men movies as I'm doing my commentary. You can't see that, but. What was my favorite film to work on with Howard, and do I have a favorite piece in the films? That's tough to say. I mean, if we're talking strictly about the Hobbit trilogy, I might say that this was my favorite to work on because we somehow had the most time, it felt like, even though we really didn't. But we did a lot of filming for documentary stuff. We did a Peter Jackson video blog on my birthday that year, so I got to have a nice birthday lunch with Howard and his family and all that sort of thing. So I think for personal memories, I loved working on this one. We had a lot of extra stuff to do on this with all the video content, and that was a huge pleasure. It's always wonderful to spend time with Howard anyway, but it was just kind of fun to be right in the midst of everything and just take a break and have a lunch. And favorite piece? Hard to say. Yeah. Sorry, Jim.
No, I was just going to say we had some questions earlier about the instrumentation of Mirkwood.
We did, yeah.
As well.
Should we get them in the woods, or should we start into it?
Let's wait for it to start sounding a little more queasy.
Okay, yeah.
And then we'll get into it.
There's supposed to be, we are starting to hear here the first bits of the Mirkwood material. There's like a principal Mirkwood theme. There's something we called a falling root, with a little bit of a musical / forest pun. But the idea is everything's supposed to sound very trippy and kind of nauseating and upsetting, much like the forest itself.
With that flash of the red eye, did we hear a callback briefly?
I think you got a little bit of a symbol, but I think that might have a scraped symbol, but I think that might have been a sound effect rather than part of the score. I'm not sure.
Right.
I have the movie set very low, so I'm not screaming at you guys. So hopefully I'm hearing everything okay.
So now, does it become a matter, in this score, it becomes a matter of atmospherics in the music that are so prevalent when Bilbo is poking about in the chambers under the Lonely Mountain. And when they get lost here in the woods, there's an incredible emphasis on what instrumentation doing weird things or unorthodox choices of instruments themselves to do weird things. And tell us more about that. This is really interesting to me.
Well, we have a lot of that music that we talked about last time, the aleatoric music, where players are given a series of pitches and some instructions. They sort of improvise. In fact, you can hear it right in here, these pulsing, bubbling figures that they don't sound rhythmic, but they don't sound like they're sitting still either. And that's the result of 60, 70 people improvising at once. Now, that little bit there, da-da-da-da-da-da, that's the Mirkwood material.
Yes.
And there's a lot of very strange instrumentation here. And in this case, I don't feel bad calling it strange because some of these are not even sort of orthodox instruments. It's just bits of metal and all sorts of strange things, cymbals that have been cut into ribbons and played with bows. There's a wonderful instrument called a waterphone, which is a pan of water. I can't see if I'm on camera here, but you have a pan of water with these metal rods coming out of it. You fill the pan with water, and you can. I think in this case, they instructed the players to strike the rods with knitting needles, and you sort of slosh the water back and forth and create a sort of warbling, pitch bending thing. You bow them at times as well, like a bass bow. You would play against these bits of metal, which creates a kind of shrieking, squealing sound. A lot of strange bowed metal percussion.
Yeah, there's Tibetan bowls,
Tibetan bowls,
being bowed, bowed tam tam, which is a very Howard Shore device that's all over the place in the scores.
Right. If you know the score to 7, that's a huge sound from 7.
There's some female choir in here as well, which is doing very similar stuff to the Dead Marshes in the Two Towers.
Right.
Oh.
You sort of bend a pitch upwards or let it float away.
Yeah, it's probably also worth talking about Fangorn here as well, while we're on the subject of the Two Towers, which is another forest not entirely dissimilar to this one, but Howard Shore manages to keep the two quite distinct.
Well, it's another issue of character. Fangorn, for the most part, is related to the Ents. He does let the music of the orcs sort of creep into it. He lets the music of the hobbits have a few unique variations inside Fangorn because they're inside Fangorn. This forest is, I mean, you get some relationships to the spiders coming up here later, but it's mostly its character is its own. The forest is almost personified here.
Yeah, there's none of the wooden percussion that you get with Fangorn.
Right, more metal in this one, isn't it?
It is. There's much less warmth.
Well, of course, who gets the metal instruments in Middle Earth? That's the sound of industrialism, of corruption.
Exactly.
So, yeah, this is a great example of how Howard goes to the source material. These things are, of course, in the film, and I make no slight against the film or its storytelling at all, but this is where you can see Howard going directly to Tolkien's concepts of what is the, what's the character of these elements in the story as Tolkien presented them? What are the larger forces at play, where you have the naturalism versus industrialism and all these things that became much more important to Tolkien as the story went on. But I think some of the elements are already here. So yeah, I mean that's part of the brilliance of Howard Shore and the way he approaches this material.
This moment with the white heart. Oh dear. Poor Bomber.
Poor Bomber. Poor everyone who has to carry Bomber.
Yeah, more like.
And more of the, there's the Mirkwood theme again.
Yes.
While we're wandering around Mirkwood, again, if anybody has any questions, the easiest way to get to me, it'll pop up on my screen first. Send me a direct message on Twitter. I'm at Doug Adams Music.
We're using the hashtag.
The hashtag of Hobbit score questions. You can do that as well. Whatever you like. Question, are there a lot of wood instruments in this forest compared to Fangorn? And no, as we were saying, Fangorn gets the wooden ones, Mirkwood gets the metal ones, which is a huge part of the musical storytelling of Lord of the Rings, is the use of metal instruments, chains and things like that, anvils, smashed piano keys. That all becomes part of the sound of industrialism, which is the baddies. That was something that Tolkien was quite against. Did Howard lean into any of his Cronenberg work of insanity? Well, I think a lot of these aleatoric techniques that we're talking about, he was developing at least concurrently to his work with Cronenberg. So I don't know if you could say he developed them specifically for the Cronenberg scores, but it was something that he was quite interested in at the same time. Aleatoric music is something, it's not a strictly Howard Shore device. It's something that was quite popular in the sort of avant-garde classical music of the 60s. The Polish avant-garde composers like Penderecki were experimenting with this type of writing. And it still exists. It became much more widespread and sort of combined with the more traditional forms of harmony and linear writing. It shows up in a lot of film scores. I mean, John Williams uses it. Alan Silvestri uses it. It's a very common approach to creating these wonderful textures. But Howard has a very unique way of treating this material. It kind of goes with his cluster writing and his divided strings and all these concepts that he sort of combines to create what we think of as the Howard Shore score. So he's not going directly back to anything from the early Synclavier days of the Cronenberg scores or anything like that. But in terms of those progressive techniques, that's when he became sort of involved with those or interested in those.
Yeah. There's no theremin in here either.
No theremin, which is a shame.
I love a good theremin.
Somebody says it. Well, sorry, what?
I was just going to say, if anyone wants a Lord of the Rings or Hobbit flavored Howard Shore score, complete with theremin, his score for the Korean video game Soul of the Ultimate Nation is highly recommended.
I can't turn my camera, but as it turns out, I am sitting directly next to a theremin right now. So if you want me to just end the commentary and do theremin solos for the next 2 hours,
Yeah,
it's fine. That's what you want. Will that help your numbers? We have a question here. It would be amazing if you could show us the film score while we watch. Are the scores available to the public anywhere? Those are things that we cannot do. These are all protected by copyright laws. And because live performances of the Middle Earth music are so popular, they're very careful about letting those scores out there. They don't want unauthorized performances, which have already been a problem over the years, I'm sorry to say, complete with costumed fake Howard Shores at some of them.
Ooh.
So yeah, we cannot. Yeah, that's right. That's right. Well, there are piano arrangements that were published, although I don't think I can still show those on a Zoom thing like this. But no, they don't publish the full scores. That is, it's very, very rare for film scores to get a full publication like that. They've begun to do it in small amounts, but it tends to be older scores-ish. Jim, what's the most recent one that Omni has actually published? Like in terms of the scores written most recently?
No.
Matrix, maybe? What's more recent than Matrix?
For anybody in the audience,
maybe the most recent one.
Yeah, sorry, we're way off the target here. Sorry.
Sorry to interrupt, but
No.
We've just seen butterflies now here at the top of the canopy above Mirkwood, and that's just to let a signal out to any of the folks who want to follow us on YouTube later on. You can fast forward your player on the film right up to this point. And what a beautiful musical moment where the sunlight for the first time.
A little bit of prominent celeste writing in there, the keyboard instrument that it's kind of like it looks like a small piano, but you're striking bell like metal bells inside, kind of like a glockenspiel, kind of. There's a question about what theme do you use as Bilbo pops his head up here and has his moment outside of the forest. I think you do get a little statement of the Erebor theme, but for the most part, it's a little standalone moment, which I think is maybe more beautiful. You know, the whole concept of that scene is he's removing himself from other situations. So it's nice to give him a moment of just complete separation.
Yeah, departure.
Yeah. And now we're getting into a composition titled Flies and Spiders.
Welcome, arachnophobics everywhere. Welcome to the show. If you had problems with the Shelob versus Samwise scenes or anything else, welcome to a good Peter Jackson film. We even have a giant centipede, unidentifiable creature, half not quite sure if it's Scorpia or what is it? It's a thing. But
he's left over from that scene in King Kong, I think.
I was going to say it's
pale bugs. Yeah,
it's left over from the trench in King Kong.
Star Wars Freak, is that the name or that's somebody's name that's asking, is there any chance of a release of the Hobbit complete recordings? Nothing is in the pipeline right now, although I suppose that's true the world over because of current situations, but it could happen someday, I suppose. Nothing's impossible. What can fans do to encourage the release of complete recordings and the release of the book? I guess the best and most vague thing I can say is keep it in the conversation. Make sure that if you have,
make some noise.
Yeah, make noise. I mean, I'm not a big believer in harassing companies to we demand blah blah blah. You know, I don't think I would have been if I had been a huge DC fan. I probably still wouldn't have gotten on board with the release the Snyder Cut thing or anything. It's just not my style. But keep it in the conversation seems like a nice generic way of saying keep talking about it, but don't yell at anybody. There was a hint of Sauron a little bit earlier, so you do get a sense of who these spiders are, if not allied with, at least where their power resides. The spiders do have their own theme as well, and there's a couple of other. Go ahead.
Just pointing out, we first heard one of their themes in film 1, very briefly, in the Radagast sequence.
Radagast's hot, yeah, right. There's some secondary bits that go with the spider, something that we call the web pattern and the stinger pattern, just to help us keep track of which is which. I think the question is, could you crowdfund the release of the book? Certainly capital is always nice, but there's rights issues to be dealt with. Those are anything that deals with music rights and multiple studios and the Tolkien estate. There's a lot of people to talk to make sure you get things just right. So it's not always a matter of just writing checks. It's making sure that people feel comfortable with what you're doing, all that sort of thing. And I think that's very important to honor that.
And publishing is just one of these things that moves at a glacial pace from time to time.
And this is one of those times. People want to know where they should make noise.
Yeah.
Social media. I don't know. I guess. I mean, nobody get picket signs out or anything like that. But if you keep discussing it. I have a feeling that Tolkien properties are going to be moving back into the spotlight a bit when we get the world back in order, and it might be nice to, discuss it in those circles.
Yeah.
In terms of the spiders talking, they wanted to have a full sing-along of Bilbo taunting the spiders with his own song. It just didn't happen in the film, but it was very clever to have the ring be the device of Bilbo's sudden cognizance of their speech. That was very clever indeed, and I think the fandom responded with, this is better than the way we understand Aragog in Harry Potter. This makes sense why Bilbo understands right away.
More ring references here, including if I remember correctly, a very beautiful violin solo coming up here, set for solo performer. I'll back us up by several minutes here, but there was a choral text that passed by shortly before we got into Flies and Spiders, which was a piece called The Elven Road, as they were wandering through Mirkwood, a piece in Sindarin, the text of which is in the book.
Bye-bye, strange centipede creature.
Here's our violin solo. Very romantic performance with a lot of vibrato.
Mm-hmm.
Question is, are the Lord of the Rings complete recordings still in print, and is my book still in print? I know
is that referring to the vinyl edition?
Well, the complete recordings, there was a vinyl edition and a CD / Blu-ray box set, one for each film, one for each score.
Right.
I think they're more available than they were in terms of the CD release. Failing that, I think they are all available on streaming services now as well.
Vinyl, I think, did sell out. I think the digital versions, the CDs and all that. I think they do exist in limited numbers. The book, I'm happy to say, that one we just reprinted right before quarantine. So I think we're into the 6th printing, and it should be readily available. It sells out on Amazon quite often, but they always order more. So keep your eyes open.
My friend who works at Amoeba Music, the famous store in Los Angeles, had told me repeatedly how fast the vinyl editions of the complete recordings were flying daily off the shelves. Yeah,
that's great. That's great.
Yeah.
So here we go with Toriel's theme. Now, this is something, again, they gave me a wonderful chance to demonstrate some of this in the music documentary, but Toriel's theme kind of begins where the theme of the Woodland Realm ends. That figure is something that ends the Woodland Realm theme, but begins her theme, which is a fantastic way to immediately show you where she's from. A great bit of portraiture in music, I think. Legolas does get some unique, at least settings of the Woodland Realm material in this score. He does not have his own theme in Lord of the Rings, but he kind of has a bit of his own score here. Some of that material is heard in this score. There's a little bit in the flute score as well. So another example of a character like Gandalf getting a theme, or Gandalf the Grey, I should specify, getting a theme of the Hobbit films, the Hobbit scores, but not in the Lord of the Rings scores.
Some of the material for Legolas is very similar to material from Return of the King, when he's doing all the acrobatic stuff, bringing down Oliphants, that kind of thing. Seem like they seem like quite sensible acrobatic feats compared to stuff in the third film. It
almost has a dance, like almost a flamenco type of feel to some of it, which is really very appropriate.
So this sequence was one of the ones that was originally scored when this was 2 films.
Right, this was all film 1, yeah.
When this was, so this sequence would have been intercut with Gandalf arriving at Dol Guldur.
Oh.
And this theme was set up in the prologue sequence of Unexpected Journey. You hear a bit of here we go, this beautiful theme. One of my favorite themes, not only in the Hobbit films, but in all 6 Middle-earth scores. But you hear this under Thranduil in his appearance in the extended edition of the Unexpected Journey prologue. And now here it is in full. Because we were getting into legalities here, someone asked, I have a question. Let's say if I were to make a fan film, could I use music based on the score of the films? I don't know how the lawyers go with those things, but technically the themes and the music, that is owned material. That's exactly why we're not broadcasting it tonight. You can hear us, but you can't hear the films. You have to do that yourself. People own these things, and that's how musicians make their living.
And indeed, some of these things are a recipe for a cease and desist in the post.
Yes, yeah. I've seen, even with a few, I have to admit, once in a while I try to throw an example of, hey, look at how this theme develops here. Put it on YouTube. It's down about 15 seconds later because somebody flags it for copyright issues. As well, they should. You could argue fair use in that example, but why bother?
We have another choral text here as well.
Yes, we do.
Which is Halls of the Woodland King.
That's right. And that's for Jealous Leggy. Jelly Leggy, as they call him online.
In these halls sits the Elven King on a throne of carven wood, oak staff in his hand, and a crown, and on his head a crown. And so on and so forth.
You have to admit, this is a phenomenal production design.
I like all the Woodland Realm stuff a lot. I think Thranduil is fantastic in these. He
Absolutely.
manages to be irritating without ever being villainous, By the end, you don't expect him to suddenly start lopping heads off of dwarves. You don't trust him, but you don't expect him to be that villainous. It's a fine line to walk as a performer, I think. I'm not an actor, but it seems interesting to me.
Indeed. But it's also nice to see that some elves are just not all nice and shiny and happy people.
Yeah.
They're not.
And that's what Howard had in mind composing this theme too, is to give it a little bit of, each of the elf themes in the first film series got they're slightly exotic, but they were still sort of warm and friendly. This one had to feel a little bit more menacing, a little bit more frightening.
Mm-hmm.
Justin, you had another question? Justin is distracted by the beauty of Thranduil.
Aren't we all?
Distracted by
Yes.
Lee Pace's eyebrows. His
Those eyebrows are,
magnificent
yeah,
eyebrows.
it's incredible. I wouldn't do that if I were them. Yeah, don't put music that you don't own the copyrights to on YouTube. Everybody, please don't do that. I don't want anyone to break the law. Be nice.
I can also guarantee that any complete recordings on YouTube are not complete.
Well, that's true. Yeah. Maybe he's just slumping over, tired. Jim's up in the middle of the night again. So,
how's that, Justin?
We have a question about some of the material coming up here. Oh, good. It's from Emily again. This moment isn't coming up for a while, but I thought I'd submit the question now. Like many fans, I love the Toriel and Keeley theme. Could you talk about how it's related or not to other Elven themes? The vocal solo and choral setting remind me a bit of Rivendell and Arwen themes. It's a unique, we'll start introducing that material in a few minutes here, but it's a unique combination of sort of Elvish material and some Dwarvish elements as well, as it should be. It's a represents them both. We did find as we went through it, there's separate elements to that theme, so we kind of broke it into its components to discuss them separately in the book. Most of which I give Elvish names, so I'm not going to even try pronouncing them. But there are several bits of material that fit together. There's some wonderful harmonies using that theme that aren't used in almost any other part of the score other than the Elvish stuff, where chords are related by they're like triads, a major third apart from one another. I think it's like C major and A flat major or something like that. And it creates this beautiful exotic sound, very similar to what we hear for the warmth of the Rivendell elves. And that's probably the most Elvish part of that theme, other than maybe the approach to the vocal music. Interestingly, it's sung by female voices, but the text is both in Sindarin, an Elvish language, and Khuzdul, a Dwarvish language.
Mm.
So yeah, it's a cool way to combine two cultures musically that don't have a sort of natural inclination to be combined, which I suppose is the point.
Indeed.
Here's a great example again of selecting point of view. If you watch carefully how the point of view shifts from Thranduil to Bilbo, but always sort of within Thranduil's point of view. It doesn't go to Shire music or ring music or anything like that. It keeps everything sort of framed in Elvish music. So it's a great, you have a three-hander here if you consider Bilbo part of this scene. And whose point of view do you get in the score? And now we've shifted to Toriel in the music. You can hear her theme coming out.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Why don't these elves sound as magical as the elves in The Lord of the Rings? Well, they're supposed to be a little, for lack of a term, a little wilier, aren't they? A little more of a sort of wild group of elves.
A little less refined, perhaps.
Yeah.
Actually, I believe there's a metaphysical reason for some of that, because many of them, under the service of Thranduil, had never traveled as far as Valinor to see the light of the two trees. And they're considered metaphysically unenlightened elves.
In Rivendell, because the question was what instruments are being excluded you were getting into the Toriel and Keeley music. What instruments are excluded in the Woodland Realm elves so that they don't sound quite as enlightened as the Rivendell and Lothlorien elves? There, you don't have the beautiful chimes and female chorus that you had for the Rivendell elves. You don't have things like the monochord, which is used to create a beautiful sort of buzzing, strumming tonality beneath the Lothlorien music. It's a much more a straight ahead orchestral approach.
I think you have a slightly more primitive approach to the percussion as well.
Yeah, almost militaristic in some ways. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
That's a good question. Was there the same amount of collaboration and time to develop scores between Howard and Peter compared to Lord of the Rings? In terms, actually, Jim, you could maybe help me with some of this if you don't mind, but I think in terms of creating the themes, the process was very, very similar. In terms of recording these scores, this is a question that comes up a lot, so maybe we can get into it here before we plunge into the river. But the process of recording these scores was quite different. This was the first of the scores to be entirely recorded in New Zealand, which meant that the process was quite different. Howard stayed in New York and kept composing while the orchestra was conducted by Conrad Pope in New Zealand.
Mr. Conrad Pope, who features in the appendices, shot by Michael Pellerin.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Jim, I know you had some questions on that process. Not that you had questions, but people were asking you questions about that process earlier today.
Yeah, so from a technical recording perspective, they had the same engineer as Abbey Road. So Pete Cobbin from Abbey Road was in New Zealand and effectively replicated the same recording layout in Wellington Town Hall.
Which is exactly what he was trying to replicate in Watford anyway, because they had begun these scores in Wellington.
Yeah, so just try and make things sound consistent. From a writing and a compositional perspective, Howard Shore would sketch compositions again in an identical way as he did for film one, but rather than doing the full orchestration himself, that would be passed to James Sizemore within his team, who would believe James Sizemore did all the mock-ups as well.
He did
for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
Which would then go on to Conrad Pope and his team to get everything prepared for orchestral performance. Everything went past Howard Shore's eyes. Howard Shore would have had final approval over everything.
Correct.
Does making an orchestration include the job of assembling the number of musicians and, deciding?
Those type of things weren't so much up for grabs because there was a specific sound they were replicating. They wanted to have the orchestra and the chorus in instrumentation and in numbers that they'd use for everything else. So that was kind of a given, I suppose.
Okay.
We have a nice, just deviating slightly, we have a nice dwarvish variation of Bilbo's fussy theme here.
That's right, yeah. So the job of an orchestrator is essentially, if Howard were to write a chord, when he would sketch something, it would kind of look like piano music. You'd write something a left hand and right hand in terms of the, two staves, a treble clef and a bass clef. And he might write next to that chord brass. On The Lord of the Rings, he would then himself take that sketch and say, okay, out of this brass chord I've designated, which of these notes is played by trombones, which is played by tuba, which is played by French horns, which is played by trumpets. And he would divide those things up specifically. If you hand something off to an orchestrator, you're essentially asking someone else to take care of those mechanics. It's not a you're not asking someone, can you come up with a theme for the elves? It's not a job like that. It's a job where you're completing things. Sometimes when a scene would change, you have to have something conformed, and then somebody snips out a bar or two here or that sort of thing, which gets more into arranging or things like that. But these are all different jobs. So, Howard generally orchestrates himself, but as we talked about this a little bit last week, as Hollywood productions get more and more squashed schedule-wise, it's very hard to get these things done. The process of composition, good quality composition has not really changed in hundreds of years. You still have, this, you still have to put all these notes on the page and figure out who plays them. It's a very old world analog
It's just
process.
it's just physically a huge amount of work.
Yeah, there's a huge physical component to it. I've spoken with composers that during the last bit of a film production will have horrible tendonitis just from writing things. They could barely manage to keep going because their hands hurt so bad. It's a huge task, and as the schedule gets smaller, you bring. The question is, Howard love the opportunity to do a big action scene like this barrel sequence, or does he love the more intimate character moments? I think he likes them all equally, but I think maybe the more intimate character-based stuff is probably closer to his heart. Howard is not he's not a sort of loud, ostentatious type of guy. He's Canadian. He's very quiet and polite. I've said a billion times, I think part of the reason that he and I got along so well is I'm from Chicago, and my Midwestern temperament meshed quite well with his Canadian temperament. He's from Toronto originally. So I think he likes those smaller, more personal scenes.
And action compositions are a hell of a lot of notes.
Yeah, it's almost like scoring a Warner Brothers cartoon. It's very dense.
Yeah, so just a quick score statistic. This composition, The Forest River, is about 7 minutes, and it's 59 pages.
Yeah, that's a great example, yeah. It's an incredible, this is maybe one of the fastest Howard Shore compositions I've ever heard in terms of the tempo on this thing. It absolutely flies.
184 beats per minute.
There you go. And it's a long sequence.
Some classic Peter Jackson excess. Sorry. So although the music drops in and out in the final mix, originally this was written through as one continuous composition.
Yeah, the album version is a lot closer to the original concept of this. Yeah. It's sort of a question, sort of a comment here, maybe an interesting talking point. He says, I think for some of the music to work, the best we have to remember the Hobbit must also work chronologically with Lord of the Rings, not the other way around. Like the Lothlorien theme for Rivendell. Well, there's a lot of talk, and I can remember this is, Howard and I would talk as he was beginning into these things, and even before they'd agreed to make these films, was talking about what would it be like to do The Hobbit. The question came up a lot, how do you score a prequel or a prequel series or whatever you want to look at this? Here comes Toriel's music. How do you reverse engineer these things? It's very interesting to me as filmmaking these days has become almost as much about world building as it is about storytelling, perhaps more so in some cases. The idea of what do you need for the narrative musically and what do you need for the world building musically can be two very different things, and it's hard to know which way to go. You could write something that sounds like a 60 years before the Lord of the Rings version of let's say the material associated with Orthanc. But when you hear that and you only have a few seconds to insert that into The Hobbit, do you recognize what it's supposed to be doing? Does it serve its storytelling purpose? You could qualify it as a world building exercise. Well, look, I took all these pitches and every other pitch got shifted by a third because, whatever. But these things need to work dramatically in the moment. So there's a lot of consideration of how to make those things happen. And I think before the Hobbit really began, when it was in the early stages, even when Howard would chat with Guillermo del Toro, the discussions always surrounded how do you make this function a bit of world building that moves everything back a little bit in history, not very much by Middle Earth standards, but a little bit. But more importantly, how do you make it work as its own storytelling? And that was a discussion before it started, and a discussion up until the last day, constant discussion. There's a little bit of the material you can hear associated with Legolas that's kind of derived from the Woodland Realm theme. I should make
that was another question that came up earlier, was whether there's any thematic material for a Thranduil.
There is a little bit, yeah.
That's probably one for next week.
Yeah, right. Yeah, we'll talk about that later. It's more prominent in the Five Armies.
Yeah.
If anybody does have any questions that are about this score, however, you can still get us on Twitter. Hashtag is Hobbit Score Questions, or just direct message me. I have my DMs open tonight. Thranduil does, although, as Jim said, it comes up a little bit later. That's a great question, and it's something that it goes down to instinct. Why does something get a theme and something not? But there are certain practicalities. Toriel has a lot to do in this story, and she makes it. She's a very physical character, makes appearances in a lot of action sequences. And why would you play orc music during this entire chase, right? Whose point of view are we taking? So if we're taking the elves' point of view, it helps to have material connected with these elf characters who are the sort of the principal agents in this part of the story. So they aren't really intellectual decisions. They're based on what are characters doing in terms of story. If Toriel didn't get a theme in any of this, and it were just underscored with generic action music, but Thranduil had a very developed theme for his he's mostly a dialogue-based character in this film, wouldn't make a lot of sense. And Indeed. As he does become a more independent and active character, he does get a little bit of material. Subtly so, but he does.
On the note of going back and doing material for prequels, even Tolkien himself, upon the pending release of The Lord of the Rings, had to go back and rewrite the Riddles in the Dark. And The Hobbit itself was fundamentally changed to a second edition to be more in alignment with what he had created 17 years later. So this happens.
Very, very much a smaller scale. But when I did the music of the Lord of the Rings films, when we originally, here comes some of our additional material for the Nine and all that.
The High Fells, yes.
Yes, people who listened very closely to the first Hobbit album heard some of this material the year before this film came out. When I did the Lord of the Rings films book, we released some of the annotated scores online at the same time. We had a special website for it. And when it came time to do the book, the tone of what I was writing and the depth of what I was trying to do had shifted a bit, and I rewrote most of the Fellowship of the Ring portion of the annotated score because of that. So I can understand looking backward and going, oh, this tone doesn't seem quite right. In fact, I think I rewrote most of that in Switzerland while we were there for some concerts. Probably most of it on the plane, because most of Switzerland was dedicated either to concerts or to running around being goofy.
So although all of this was recorded when the sequence was in film 1, this is an entirely new recording with some different thematic material. As we discussed earlier, this is mostly based on the Nine. Originally, it was a selection of the sort of Necromancer and Sauron material throughout the sequence.
The Nine also has a distinction that it's one of the very few bits, maybe the only bit of choral music where the choral lyrics become dialogue in the film, or at least a version of them do. When I originally saw this, he just kind of turned around and Red, I guess, was just standing there. There was no big thump on his introduction. It was very, very quiet. But the lyrics to the music here, in part, say, let his soul be taken and never woken, this servant of evil, bearer of the cursed sign, one of a number, one of the Nine. And some of that becomes, in a form dialogue here in the film, later in the film. So I think it's one of the only times that happens. There's a similar thing for the introduction of Arwen, where her lines are being sung by the chorus at the same time. So here he's speaking the choral lyrics.
This outstanding photography of the New Zealand landscape and the waterfalls is just killer, and the mountainsides, it's killer good. Say what you will and complain as you might about the script and the love triangle and blah blah blah, but there's still a lot to enjoy. And this in particular, the extended sequences in Dol Guldur now introduce a lot of meat and potatoes story for those interested in Thorin and his lineage. I mean, I can't believe so much of this material was cut from the theatrical version.
How much longer was the extended edition of this one compared to theatrical?
I'll have to look up comparison, but it is the longest of the 3 extended films in this trilogy. In the YouTube chat, it says 27 minutes. Thank you, Danny.
27 minutes, yeah. That's
27 minutes, yeah. So theatrical 161 minutes, extended 186.
Thank
the
you.
most they put back in for anything?
I think
the
so.
biggest change time-wise? Okay.
I think so.
So the lack of choral music. I'm not sure I detect a lack of choral music. I think there's a there's still a large amount. All those things are creative decisions. It's you can afford a chorus. If you're working on The Hobbit, you can afford a chorus. They're more action-oriented pictures. There was always the comment made in the production team that there was and this was sort of tongue-in-cheek, so please don't take this too seriously, but that there was a feminine quality to the Lord of the Rings films and a masculine quality to the Hobbit films. And again, they meant that very tongue-in-cheek, so please don't take that out of context. But I think because of that, they wanted a more they conceived this with a sturdier, more orchestral sound. This is the end of film 1, by the way, in the old 2-film cut.
And they also had all male vocalists and songwriters for the 3 ending songs, as opposed to 3 female vocalists for the 3 ending songs.
Which was actually a held over idea. They originally had considered having a male vocalist for the end of Return of the King. They thought, well, we've done a boy, we've done a woman. And Howard didn't work on the Enya material, so he was more thinking of his work. But we had a boy soloist, we had a female soloist, do a male soloist for Return of the King. But it didn't eventually feel like that was the way to go with it, and some of those ideas came back here.
Excellent. Now let's.
That's right. Yeah, the comment was that shot of Bard the Bowman was the original end of movie 1 in the 2-film version of The Hobbit. That is correct.
That would have been quite the cliffhanger.
No, they still have a cliffhanger coming. Don't worry.
Oh no, we'll complain about that later. let's talk about what is the most significant parallel drawn between the introduction of Lake Town versus the introduction of Rohan. Everyone loves to state, I read it and I see it everywhere all the time, that fans believe this was Howard's biggest introduction of, like he did in The Two Towers, he had the chance to bring in a whole new culture. And because it was such a strong motif, he could play with it in so many variations along with his other creations. And is this true that the Rohan parallel is perhaps applicable here, do you think?
I'm sorry, could you clarify, what do they see as the parallel?
That in The Two Towers, when he introduced the theme for Rohan, it was the biggest musical introduction of a new culture, and the biggest musical statement of The Two Towers is recognizably the Rohan theme by most analysis of fans. And is it also true that the Lake Town culture being introduced at this point in Desolation of Smaug, being the second film in a trilogy, is also Howard recollecting to that Rohan statement of a whole new culture and a very big theme?
I don't think he was thinking in terms of finding a need to do it because it had happened in the Two Towers. I think it's just where those things fall in the story. The biggest statement of the Rohan theme in that section of the Two Towers is probably when Theoden has the influence of Saruman taken away from him. He's cured of the curse. So that was a big cinematic moment. Here we have these lovely shots of Esgaroth or Lake Town coming up, and it's a great moment to kind of let the music do its thing. There's not a lot of dialogue. There's not a lot of sound effects. Fish and water tend to be quiet. So it presents him with the palette to do that sort of thing. But yeah, I mean, Howard does like to seize those moments where he can introduce a new culture. That's a completely valid statement, I'd say. Yeah.
I mean, in terms of being one of the worlds of men. I mean, it's very different to both Rohan and Gondor, both of which have a sort of regal air to them. Lake Town has a much sort of smaller folk-like feel to it, I think.
Yeah, it's a working class theme. You could almost
absolutely
picture them humming that theme while they're towing barges or something.
I think perhaps that's why it invited the comparison in the first place. Perhaps that it's not regal like Gondor or like Erebor is presented.
Right, and it's different because we see both Gondor and Rohan on hard times. So it's not as if Lake Town is a little more downtrodden because it's in poor condition. It's a different culture. They're not about kings and nobility. They're working class. They have rough hands in Lake Town.
Mm-hmm.
Jessica wants to know about the Sindarin lyrics in the Woodland Realm. We have to back that up a bit. I believe that would be the text, Halls of the Woodland King. And yes, they are in Sindarin. And I am not going to try to pronounce them, but that was the one I was mentioning, that the translation is within these halls sits the Elven King on a throne of carven wood, oak staff in his hand, so on and so forth. So there is Sindarin in there, absolutely.
Yeah. Translation's courtesy of David Salo, right?
Correct. Yes, that's absolutely right.
I'm sorry.
No, that's the other way around. Philippa writes it in English, and David turns it into Sindarin.
So and the other text that appears in that sequence is the White Light of Forever, which alternates between Kuzdul and Sindarin.
Right, and that's associated obviously with
Keely and Toriel.
Yeah.
The elven armor is nuts. Those two guards outside the gates are just insanely beautiful. The design is gold.
Yeah, I think the design for all that stuff is wonderful. It makes it feel connected to the other elvish cultures, but it's its own thing. Yeah, it's really nice.
A very distinct Alan Lee drawing
yes.
into real life with that armor. It's just beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. And could your orcs be more inviting, friendly, lovely? These guys. I love the way orc culture is presented by Peter with all of its grotesqueness and morbid attention to bodily functions and grossness, and just
they never ran out of ideas in terms of making the orcs yucky.
Indeed. And now here we are before the fog of Lake Town lifts. Is this this is perhaps not expanded for this extended edition, but it feels like a very nice moment of quiet and breathing.
And this string line that we're hearing, that ba-da-da-da-dum, ba-da-da-da-dum, that's a part of the original sketch that Howard created for Bard. It's sort of its own pattern, so we gave it the name of a little strumming pattern. Howard said he did sort of have in his mind of this is a very vague comparison, but Bard is a sort of rock star strumming it, da-da-da-da, a physical repeating guitar chord type of feel to it. Indeed. So that's it's a funny statement, but it's a nice insight into how he creates someone with a heroic feel to his character. And on top of that, of course, there is a theme for Bard the Bowman. And Bard the Bowman, Bard ends up with a ton of musical material. There's material related to him. He has that strumming pattern. There are other themes that kind of show his relationship to Girion. He has, as I say, this is Bard the Bowman, but there's sort of a Bard the hero, or a heroic Bard theme that shows up in film 3 as well. Is there any Gimli material in here? No, Gimli doesn't actually have his own theme. He was always sort of dwarvish variations of the Fellowship theme, if you got anything.
Mm-hmm. Actually, at the moment where Gimli shows the picture that Legolas interrogates him about, he's like, "That's my son. That's my wee lad." There's no score at all at that moment.
Right. Yeah. Question. This says, what were the most frequently used instruments in this film? I suppose that means specific to Desolation of Smaug. My guess would be the violin. I think, that's very difficult to say. It does bring up an interesting discussion of how Howard treats the orchestra. And I've mentioned this a bit in the book, that he doesn't think of it in the traditional late romantic idea of we like to talk about colors in orchestration, the colors of flutes in particular ranges, the strength of an oboe in a middle range, and the comparable thinness and weakness in the upper range. Howard doesn't treat his orchestrations like that, where he's painting with colors. He likes to think in terms of ranges. I like that I'm having this lofty discussion of orchestral technique. It's Fisher flopping around on the screen. There's a dichotomy. But Howard likes to think of ranges. So if he's thinking upper voices, a higher melody, he's thinking a sort of massed combination of violins and flutes and oboes and clarinets and trumpets and things like that. It's not the usual approach to orchestration. It's part of what makes his sound have an almost ancient type of sound to it, a little bit sturdier than the usual orchestration. And it's part of that Howard Shore technique of things are almost always doubled in some manner. It's not a extremely transparent music, but it is quite transparent, or can be quite transparent harmonically. He's not one to shy away from just doing a line against line thing, two-part counterpoint. He's not filling in these giant, thick, diminished seventh chords or whatever it is. He could pull these things out when he needs to, and he can get into his clusters when he wants to, but he has a very unique way of doing these things. Jim, I think you've been in on some of these discussions with Ludwig Vicky, the wonderful conductor who does the live shows, how nobody else writes like Howard. His technique is his and his alone.
Yeah, I was going to say there's always a fairly distinct separation in Howard's process between sort of the composing and sketching and then orchestrating, rather than orchestrating as he goes. He will fully complete sketching and composing and then move onto orchestration afterwards.
And these orchestrations, sorry to cut you off, but just quickly, the orchestrations on these films, even though, as we did mention, they were done by other people to facilitate the schedule, they were very much done to, in Howard's style. There was a lot of, he was always a part of every step of that process to make sure that it was part of, it was authentically Shorean music, if I can coin a terrible term. But please finish. I'm sorry.
No. Just a quick catch up on where we are with themes. We've had two more here. So the theme for Lake Town on the big reveal, and another one for the politicians of Lake Town.
Right. And the politicians kind of have two elements to their theme. This is a great statement here. Yeah. Politicians have a processional version and a recessional version. That seems like a properly stuffy way of titling those themes.
I'll tell you something. When I hear the theme of Lake Town, I hear something distinctly British Isles. I don't know how else to describe it. I'm hesitant to use the word Celtic, but I hear something very distinctly British Isles in this theme.
If I remember correctly, Pete asked Howard to evoke smugglers in Cornwall, I believe, was the direction.
Yeah, it has that kind of sea shanty feel to it.
Oh, I got corrected on that though. It's a lake shanty.
Oh, a lake
I got my wrist slapped every time I said that.
a large body of water shanty.
Yeah, right,
but it's not entirely similar to sort of something like, say, a piece by Vaughan Williams, maybe based on existing folk tunes. It has that kind of feel to it.
One of the things that I think is very interesting about it is the way that Howard wrote the original tune too, is where the pulse is, and this affects the way that the orchestra plays it. Because if a different composer had done it, I think it would have been like the beat were there.
Like
Howard
a march.
wrote it, yeah, like a march, precisely right. Howard, his beat fell, which results in a much heavier performance from an orchestra. A really good composer will know how to write things, not just so that you get the pitches and the rhythms you want, but how to evoke a performance from an orchestra in the manner that you want it.
It's a bit more like a waltz now.
It still has an even number of beats per bar and all that sort of thing, but it has a heavier, again, that you can imagine physical labor occurring to this piece.
I can imagine you.
Once again, another example of having a very high-minded conversation over incongruent imagery.
Over all those mountain oysters going on. I would forget it. It's insane.
Can I just come back in a couple minutes?
We can come
back.
I have no idea how Stephen Fry manages to get dialogue out while eating this stuff.
It's just gross. But
it's fake. It's noodles and stuff, isn't it?
He is a consummate professional.
Turkey sausage or something, whatever they made. Poor guys.
This is another extended edition composition here as well.
Yes,
this is all new footage.
Indeed, but there's I hear in that music of Lake Town, I hear just as much workmen on the wharf, or what you call it, smugglers where?
Cornwall.
Smugglers in Cornwall. I hear Eustacia Vi in The Return of the Native. I hear it like, them going off to waltz with one another at some party, and all the neighbors talking about, it's just that it's so specifically English into my ears. It's and that is what Tolkien really wanted. He wanted storytelling that wasn't leftovers from France, like the Arthurian cycle. He wanted things that were distinctly English, and with the absence of more of the poetry being turned into songcraft in this particular film. We have a lot of it in Unexpected Journey, but not much here. It's refreshing to have such a distinctly English sound to the melody in Lake Town. It really is.
French horn performance of it here too.
Yeah,
this is one of the sets that Howard Shore visited when he was working on the film, and he is often credited with a very inspirational quote that the way to write this much music or to become a composer is to always keep the pencil moving. But he kind of joked with me after he has visited this set that it was so immense and so incredibly detailed, and he said, I'm just sitting here with my pencil. They've done all this. So he kind of joked that it made him feel like, wow, this is quite a lot of work. And it is a gorgeous set. I was not on it, but it's very well designed. So I think we're still in the composition Protector of the Common Folk. It's basically settings of Lake Town and the various bits associated with the politicians of Lake Town. There's a little bit of Erebor earlier, including that syncopated pattern that I mentioned that's associated with Erebor. The comment was, should the music for the politicians have been played funnier? It's always a matter of taste, but I think in composition circles, writing for comedy is renowned for being incredibly difficult, because of the issue of tone. You can play against comedy and try to play it serious so that the humor is like a comedy of fish out of water, no Lake Town pun intended. You can do things, very Carl Stalling, the wonderful composer, did all the Warner Brothers cartoons, and everything is very slapsticky and tightly matched the action and kind of wacky sounding. I think the idea here was to make something that still feels like it's part of the greater Middle Earth. You don't want a couple of comic book characters, that sort of broadness suddenly appearing.
In retrospect, many of the fans were wondering how there would be a blend of the golden-hued fairy tale, the children's episodic fairy tale, which is the hallmark of The Hobbit as a book, versus the Sturm and Drang of the Lord of the Rings trilogy, which we get to. And visually and thematically, I think this movie is the transition stage between what we saw in film one and where the introduction of the dragon, everything really transforms in terms of menace. And instead of looking at the world through rose-colored glasses, things become much more sharply drawn. And even from Bilbo's point of view, certainly, after his encounter with the ring and what he realizes the ring is doing to him in Mirkwood, and this encounter with the dragon, I think the fans may have been, wondering how far it would be tied into Lord of the Rings seriousness. But this is a big step closer.
Bard's family theme shows up in. Sorry, the comment, you guys couldn't hear it. There was a question that, or a comment that Bard's family theme is awesome, and somebody wished that it were in the movie more often. But I think it's in Battle of Five Armies quite a bit. I think you get a number of very broad statements of it during the battle itself. So more to come. People notice that the Bard's family theme was very similar to some of the early Bilbo material as well, which is sort of just Howard in his warm voice, I think. So we're getting into some of the Girion material here. There's a theme for Girion and a theme related to his failure as well.
It's called Lord of Girion, right?
The theme?
The name of the track?
It's Girion.
Girion, Lord of Dale. Yes, yes, yeah.
Thank you.
Those track titles were cause of much discussion, and you would be shocked at how often we went back and forth on track titles.
Oh, and before we get to that, at least there was not a song title like, Qui-Gon's Funeral. At least there was something like that in the release.
We were quite careful to avoid anything really spoilery.
Yes. Now, the question that we were hearing from Mission Control was, what about the suggestion that a lot of the orchestrations were done by whom?
I don't think it was a question of orchestration. It was a question of ghostwriting, which is a spurious rumor, which has been floating around ever since the announcement was made that this score was not orchestrated by Howard Shore. However, every composition in both these films, in Desolation of Smaug and Five Armies, was written by Howard Shore.
Well, that's very good to put that categorically to rest. That's very good. I don't know, the audience has to catch up with us sometimes. We're catching messages from
are we ahead of the
little
audience?
man behind the curtain. No, we're good. But
okay.
to let everyone know, in terms of housekeeping, we're now at 1 minute 35. 1 hour. 1 hour and 35 minutes. And that means we are literally halfway through the film, ladies and gentlemen. Desolation of Smaug, extended edition. We're joined by Jim Ware, and Mr. Doug Adams, and I myself am Clifford Broadway, and this is the OneRing.net doing a very special Torn Tuesday. What changes over the next 15 to 20 minutes in terms of score is leaving everything behind in terms of journey, journeying music, travel music, it is now suddenly at the arrival point where the music is, writing out terms of a whole new destiny for these characters, don't you think? And that's what's so impressive about what happens after we leave the Desolation of Smaug and we get to inside information. And then it just becomes this wonderland of crazy, weird sonic sounds. And then it's all Smaug all day, all night.
There was one thing I wanted to point out. Just going back a couple of scenes where we saw Bilbo's fussy theme applied to the dwarves.
Yes,
and we saw that happen earlier on in the Woodland Realm as well. So that concept of thematic migration, where thematic material from one character gets applied to other characters or groups of characters, is something that we'll see much more of in the third film with Smaug's material, as the whole concept of dragon sickness comes in.
And these are, again, ideas coming from the book that,
Indeed.
Bilbo and the dwarves are a single company at this point, and the sickness of both Smaug and Thorin's ancestors comes into play quite largely. So there's some lovely Toriel material. And I guess I haven't made a pitch for a little bit, but if anybody wants to ask questions, we're trying to get to them live, so you can yell at me on Twitter. My DMs are open, or use the tag Hobbit Score Questions.
I have a question here from Zachariah Gidney, who is at the Gidney Bean on Twitter. Was there or is there any plan to do a symphony tour as Howard did with LOTR, but with the Hobbit?
Oh, and I've got some Gidney Bean questions as well. I didn't even notice them. I apologize.
So I don't think there are any plans at the moment. Some material from The Hobbit has been performed. There is a concert piece, which is, I think, 4 movements from The Hobbit. I don't believe there are any plans to do a live-to-projection performance like The Lord of the Rings as yet. But as with all these things, never say never. It could happen.
Yeah. I'd like to see the suite get played again. I think it was done once in Pittsburgh. Is that right?
It was done in Tenerife, I think, at one point as well.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, that's right.
And it does actually have some unique Smaug material from the opening of film 3, which wasn't used.
Right. Yeah.
But more on that next week.
And our Gidney Bean friend has some questions about the Gamelon as well. We'll get to that soon, but yes, it's coming up.
I'm just blown away by sunset photography by Andrew Lesney, the late and great Andrew Lesney. Just blown away by what I'm looking at.
That's another, not to take any attention away from Andrew, who I much dearly missed, but that's another great example there of Howard underscoring dialogue or sort of prose. He does that, of course, with the Ring in the beginning of Fellowship of the Ring, and here with the prophecy of the dwarves. He has a wonderful way of getting behind dialogue without competing with it, but without becoming just padded nonsense. He's still writing something musically interesting. It's harder than it seems. I have another choral text coming up here before too terribly much longer, so we'll get into that when we have time.
Indeed.
I
don't think we touched on the use of the clavichord in the.
No, I was going to talk about that. Yeah. The clavichord
is confused with the harpsichord, which everyone thinks.
Quite right. Yeah, the clavichord is a sort of older version of the harpsichord. Most people, if you're around our age, we might know it from some of the the funk music that was getting quite popular in the 70s. There was a sort of an electronic clavichord that showed up a lot of Stevie Wonder stuff, and a lot of great R&B music from that era. But it was an instrument very similar to a harpsichord that sort of plucked a string sound, but with maybe a little bit less personality to its voice, a little drier sound.
What was Ray Manzarek playing with the Doors?
Was that?
What was Ray Manzarek playing with the Doors? That was clavichord?
Oh, was it? I forget. Clavichord or Rhodes? I forget.
We need to look that up.
All those organs were big at that time. The clavichord, the Novachord, the Hammond B3, the Rhodes, the great sounds. And they show up in the orchestral film music at the era too, not doing your typical popular sounds, but sort of acting as an expanded keyboard section. Jim, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the Rhodes shows up in a number of spots in things like Empire Strikes Back and some of these, very classical sounding scores.
Yeah, you're right.
Okay. Now, you'll notice that the music shifted there from Lake Town music to Erebor music.
Quickly.
Yeah, quickly and tellingly, sort of showing the direction of that conversation, who was in charge, who had great promises in their imaginations. And here's Thorin's theme, a really wonderful setting of it. Perhaps sort of similar to Thorin's speech back in Bag End, musically.
Yeah, that's probably a good comparison.
Rare moment of no music.
There's a few of those in this film. It's I think there's definitely some longer gaps, so upwards of 2 minutes in a few spots.
Jim, what time is it in England right now?
What time is it here? It is 2:58 in the morning.
I'm afraid you have been surpassed. We have somebody listening and watching from South Africa, and it's 4 a.m. right now, 5 degrees Celsius. So
Wow.
we have a truly dedicated viewer. Thank you so much. That's fantastic.
Welcome from South Africa. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
It's a little warmer than that here.
Here too.
For future fans who are going to be looking very closely at Amazon Studios and their upcoming production of their Second Age Middle-earth series, all these scenes in Lake Town show a very big departure, I think, in terms of multiculturalism and diversity in the races of people that are represented in Lake Town, and that's because Lake Town was such a center of trade and commerce once upon a time between many kingdoms of men in the east, in the far east, and the Iron Hills and the woodland realm, and before Mirkwood became an awful place, from other farmlands to the south and to the southeast of Rune, and to the Dorwinian lands, if you would follow the river all the way south, where the great vineyards were and where great wine would be brought up. And that's something to be looking forward to, as the new Amazon series can also have an opportunity to embrace diversity and show multiculturalism in different places as the Numenorians travel around the planet of Arda, and the subject of colonizing and the storytelling can touch many, many different things that will perhaps contemporize our viewpoint of Tolkien in a new way.
Yeah,
I think it'll be very interesting to see. Very interesting.
Very welcome, man.
Yes, very much so.
That was just to head back to the music for a moment, if I may. That was a great moment there, as the the rulers of Lake Town making their speech, but it's all dwarvish music. So another great example of whose theme gets played, you know. Not nearly as important as real world diversity, I grant you, but
No, truly. To stay on point, the music as they depart Lake Town is not so much Lake Town. It's more Erebor driven, as the focus of the story comes back to the goal of the company.
Quite right. Yeah, and it's this speechifying that will power the residents of Lake Town after the dragon. So this is "One Day You Will Be King" is the name of the choral text that's soon to show up, all in Khuzdul. Khuzdul is usually sung in Lord of the Rings by only male voices. In this score, it's a bit more mixed chorus, not quite the machismo of. So I'm distracted by that instrument there in the middle, which I think Alan Lee has, but I didn't pause long enough to see it. That is an instrument that is called a serpent. So very appropriate to what's coming up here.
Yes,
that was another little Plan 9 piece.
Yes, right. Not a Howard Shore composition. It's Plan 9.
Oh yes.
I believe Howard Shore's contributions to the diegetic music are done at this point. I think it was just Rivendell in film 1. Although I'm not sure anyone would want to take credit for this piece anyway.
Someone somewhere will want it on an album, I'm sure.
That's true, yeah. The fans like to have every little snippet of whatever is in there, so that's okay. So we're going to move into a composition titled "In the Shadow of the Mountain."
Indeed. And we will have our first glimpse of an actual Desolation.
You get a lot of harmonies in this piece that are based on the Durin material, but it's just the harmonies in a lot of places. That A minor, G major chord progression, just moving in very, very simple block chords, but it's enough to evoke a very specific sound. So was I.
We're almost 5 hours into The Hobbit without a dragon, except for the brief prologue glimpse. There you go. There's your hero shot of Thorin, and here we are looking at Erebor. I mean, the Paramount Pictures logo.
Of course, Thorin's theme again. The question is there any relation to Moria in this music? Not specifically. There are a couple of figures that are carried over or similar to Moria, but the Dwarodelf music is perhaps a little similar to Thorin's theme, but Thorin has its own personality, the theme.
Dale. City of Dale.
There was a comment about the furnace chords here. This is there was a comment made earlier that we're quite far into the story and we still haven't seen the dragon, but musically, he's been a lead character since the prologue of Unexpected Journey. we're getting into some of that. As the Smaug music is going to begin overtaking the score, you do get some very unique instruments doubling the melody line. We'll talk about the gamelan that sits beneath the theme in a little bit. It's a Radagast. But you're going to hear things like a bass oboe, which is relatively rare. They show up on some Strauss pieces and things like that, but sometimes called a heckelphone, and that'll show up. You get a Dizi flute, which is an Asian flute that has a wonderful, unique sound to it as well. But we'll get to Smaug in a little bit.
Fans of Gandalf's theme may like the upcoming moment.
Yes,
Mhm.
I know I do.
We're getting into my favorite extra material in this film. By far,
Mm.
this is my favorite extra material. Everyone always wanted to know, what was Gandalf doing off stage? And in the book, Professor Tolkien took the most adored character, besides Bilbo, right out of the book, and there's no Gandalf at all, and he's saving him for much, much later as a big surprise. And yet here, as moviegoers, we're blessed with all this wildly extravagant, stuff going on in Dol Guldur. I think it's great. I love it.
All
And
right.
answers to the mystery of old dwarven rings.
Yes, and here's the theme that Jim was referring to just a moment ago.
That's the one.
Almost. There we go. A very fantastic setting of Gandalf's theme with some of the Moria, or Mordor, or in this case, Dol Guldur, lower figures beneath it. So combining some
Wow.
themes there. Very cool moment.
That's so cool. Yeah.
Yeah. And that means we're into a spell of concealment music. In fact, been into it for a little bit. Choral text coming up here is drawn again from One Day You Will Be King. And the House of Durin, the theme.
Mhm.
House of Durin and Thorin are both set over the same harmonies. Those harmonies I was mentioning before creates a very tight tie between the two. And now we're into Thrain. And Jim, do we want to get into the Palantir stuff here, or do you want to wait a little bit?
We could. I mean, I'm not entirely sure where that originally sat, but we can talk about it a little bit.
It was near the end of this sequence when they're on the bridge, I believe is where it was. I think.
Yeah. So the Thrain composition is actually on the Battle of Five Armies deluxe album. That contains a few different pieces of music. So there's the piece for the upcoming fight between Gandalf and Thrain. And there's another composition which was written for a sequence where Gandalf and Thrain find a Palantir in Dol Guldur. And
Wow.
How do people know about the Palantir scene? Did images come out, or how do people know?
I don't know. I genuinely have no idea of how people know about that, but I don't think there's any publicity photos or any other reference to it anywhere.
No. I did see that scene. It was part of the sequence when I saw the film, but it was very incomplete. There's a little jabbing figure that takes, has several occurrences in the sequence that we titled "The Prisoners of Dol Guldur." It's just a little angular violin thing that trills up at the top and has some sort of clustering things happening in there. But you hear it enough that we decided to give it a name. Other than that, most of this composition is based on Erebor material, and this is another example of a bit of material coming back from Lord of the Rings that was associated with Mordor in the Lord of the Rings that we never really. It only occurred once there, so it didn't have a theme title. But this became a sort of a threat of Mordor theme that we decided to codify a little bit more. So you get a bit of that. You'll get some of the standard skip beat and descending thirds things. Most distracting part of the scene to me is he looks like Robert Duvall the entire time. Rain really, really makes me get confused for a bit.
You know what?
Doesn't
I
it?
never thought of that.
I'm sorry. I probably ruined the scene for you. I'm sorry.
Never thought about that. That's wonderful. But I think there is so much pathos in learning about Thorin's missing father, and he lost his grandfather. And this is where it's all about dwarven history, and then the third film is ultimately less of a Hobbit film, and it's much more of a Thorin and the Line of Durin film, actually. So this is where we're getting into that area.
We have another Kuzdal choral text for that as well, which is Father and Son.
Father and Son, yes.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's a lovely text. I had a son. I heard his voice calling in the darkness, calling for his father, but I could not answer. And goes on to lament how long he's been imprisoned and how he couldn't be available for his son. While we're in a non-musical scene, if anyone has questions, I'm at Doug Adams Music on Twitter. Send them to me through direct message. I'm open right now, or use the tag Hobbit Score Questions.
Indeed. You are watching theonering.net. That is a dwarven magical ring.
You can hear some of the classic Lord of the Rings villainous themes in here.
Mm-hmm.
Interestingly, these scenes, even compared to some of the battle scenes, these are very sound effect heavy scenes. You know, everything from the vines to the memories of the Battle of Moria to the effects for the necromancer showing up. So I think the music went a little bit lighter in some of these scenes to not compete with the sound effects. Even the vast battle scenes, they tend to be sort of, helicopter shots and things like that. So the sound effects aren't quite as loud, and the music can push the scene a little bit more. But
Yeah,
some of these things are tough to do.
I think that's why things sort of dip in and out, was where things have just been taken out of the final mix as well.
Right. And here we get into On the Doorstep, right?
We are. Scenes were moved around a little bit here. So originally, after the Thrain's line, no one must enter that mountain, the cut would have been to that scene would have been later. So the shot immediately following would have been Bilbo entering the mountain.
Right. And that's how that was still assembled when I worked on these. Yeah. So this is a sort of luminous, glowing setting of Erebor, but still a little weak. They're not inside yet. A little thinner, but growing in strength as their confidence does. Segueing right into Thorin. There's some great examples in this area of the score of that figure that I was speaking of last week. It's threaded through a number of themes. That's it sort of represents the suffering of the dwarves. Again, it's one of those ones that I'm not going to try to sing it because it's very awkward to do so. But it's a kind of linear pattern. I know. Sorry, it seems like a very scammy way to like. Well, if you want to know, you have to read the book. But it's just sort of hard. DM me and I'll play it on a piano and send it to you.
Okay.
A very sad setting of Thorin's theme here as he's seemingly defeated. That little line in the violins there, that FEDCB, that was very similar to or based on the dwarvish suffering thing. Some alto flutes in this section of the score, not exactly unusual, but a nice doubling instrument for flute players. There's a little bit more depth to the tone.
Mm.
A defeated version of Erebor here.
Should we expect? We should expect some moonlight right about now.
You should, and it's going to be the same music that you heard the last time you had a prominent moonlight scene. This is the Moon Letters theme that you hear in Rivendell when they are reading the map.
Exactly.
The chorus is singing in here very softly the text, "A gem like no other." So they're already singing about the Arkenstone coming up here. Here you can start hearing the Moon Letters passage.
I love it.
Complete with the references to Rivendell, since that's where they learned about the Moon Letters. The low strings kind of dancing around the Rivendell arpeggios. That was originally in a very early version underscored by a huge French horn whoop, but I think it was a little too action filmy.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I think they made the right choice. I think it was playing
Near
with
dropping of the key.
Yes. Did a Fast and the Furious type of thing on it. And we're going to switch back to the choral text of One Day You Will Be King, singing again about his heritage.
Indeed.
So first we're playing to Thorin, going with his point of view first. And then a bit of just lovely emotional scoring for English horn here, cor anglais. Back to Thorin's material.
Little reminder of the Arkenstone coming up.
Correct, yes. And here is the Arkenstone theme. So we divided that in half. That kind of beautiful clustering theme where the women are singing a gem like no other is the Arkenstone theme. And that line on top of it, ba-da-da-da-da-da-da, is what we call dark lands. They're used separately and have distinct purposes here as the Arkenstone becomes a greater part of the story. Mm-hmm. This is a great bit of sort of building but not completing the Shire theme as Bilbo comes into play.
Yes.
Now, I think this is another bit of editing of order of things, isn't it?
It is. This is somewhere in The Hunters on the album, I believe.
Right. As originally scored, this should have gone directly into The Courage of Hobbits with the Bilbo entering. Now we're back to it. Here comes the old clarinet on the Shire theme, kind of classic Shire tone established in Lord of the Rings.
And for a film with Hobbit in the title, we have not had a huge amount of Hobbit material in this picture.
Yeah, that's true. That's quite true. It certainly has some key moments coming up in the rest of the score and in the next one, but it's not a. It doesn't have huge stretches of representation. I guess that's true of Lord of the Rings as well, though. You don't get like really extended standard settings of that theme. It's always sort of developed into something else.
Yeah.
This is where some of the strangest sounds and some of the atmospherics I was talking about earlier are going to come so much into play.
Oh, as we get into Smaug?
Yes, as we get down into the lair.
Indeed, yeah.
Yeah. Oh.
Drew asks, why is Arwen's theme in the score? Although that's material is coming up later. It's a theme that is kind of came to be associated with elvish healing. So it's used when I'm watching another fight here. When we see Keely being healed, we get a bit of that music as well to connect that. She's speaking the same spell. A bit of Gandalf in there. I think that scene originally said army on it, where similar to how Smaug used to just say dragon whenever he flew around. Early versions of the film. So I think the Palantir stuff originally happened in here someplace.
For those keeping score, that is the second Wilhelm.
It's definitely the most dramatic Wilhelm that's ever been used. I don't think anyone's ever used it for a beloved character's death before.
I don't ever want to hear that Wilhelm scream again. Uh-oh. New phone. Who's this?
They did a nice way of, or found a nice way of sort of representing the eye and the figure at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So this is some classic Lord of the Rings music here, thematically speaking.
Yeah, it's very similar to the Minas Morgul material from
Yes,
Return of
right.
the King.
Right. Are there any differences from Lord of the Rings in Sauron's theme, or is it the same? Well, all of that Mordor material is quite developed. It is a bit different until you sort of, reveal who the necromancer is. Then it starts to resemble Lord of the Rings more directly. But simple things is like the types of thirds that are descending. Sometimes it's major, sometimes it's minor. They switch those up to just create different tones to some of those old classic themes. That begins right off the bat with the early Dol Guldur themes or scenes in Unexpected Journey. Sauron's theme is really the same as the Evil of the Ring theme. So that's sort of a setting of it. It's not like the prime setting or anything.
No, we need to talk about the strange Tibetan bowls that we're listening to right now.
So yeah, we're getting into some of these very interesting percussion sounds. Howard often compared working on The Lord of the Rings to drawing a map. You had music from the north, you had music from the south, you had music from the east, music from the west. And he wanted to kind of push the Smaug music a little further east. And I think there was certainly the influence of Asian representations of dragons in mythology and celebrations and things like that. So I think he had the idea in his head of there was the gamelan element, which is an Indonesian element, and we'll get into that in a moment. But there is also the idea of almost like Chinese parade celebrations, where you often will have figurative dragons and these wonderful clanging cymbals and things like that. And if you look at the scene right here, look at this. You have tons of these small circular metal objects. So these small cymbals, sang cymbals or finger cymbals, they would use depending on what the moment called for. But that kind of clanging patter of small metallic sounds came from that suggestion of Asian culture and the scenery, the coins. So it was kind of a very a great way to tie all these things together, I think.
Yeah, but what are some of those? I'm just trying to identify the names of some of those things that we're hearing. Are they glass bowls? Or are they gongs? Are they brass?
Mostly metal. That low. It almost has a metallic, like a gong-like roar to it, but it sort of has a pitch to it as well. That's part of the gamelan ensemble, and they do have these low pitched gongs. Usually, what we call a gong in music, it's usually a tam tam. Gongs have to have a little bump right in the middle of them to create a very specific pitch. The tam tam is that classic roaring, crashing type of sound. But he uses real gongs in here. They have that hollow pitched sound that gives a wonderful sense of space and presence, and is great for the cavernous halls of Erebor here.
Yeah, kettle gongs.
Kettle gongs, right.
Apparently there's some shakuhachi in here as well, but I'm wondering if that got
I think
lost in
it
the final
doubles.
mix.
Yeah, it doubles the melody in some cases, but
Yeah.
I think it's mixed pretty tight with the woodwind sound. Shakuhachi being a wonderful Asian flute. Film score aficionados / nerds probably know it from the beginning of Jurassic Park or any number of James Horner scores. He liked that instrument quite a bit.
And here is the magnificent Smaug himself.
Yes, indeed, yeah. Smaug's theme, or themes, I should more accurately say, may be my favorite themes of The Hobbit. Things like Lake Town and Woodland Realm give it a good run for its money, but I think the Smaug material, I know the argument is made, well, this story is called The Hobbit. I want lots of Hobbit, but for me, you're always waiting to see the dragon. It's a very exciting thing, and he sort of personifies this story to me. Certainly as a kid watching those cartoons, that crazy dragon with almost lion's mane stuck in my head forever. So to have this wonderful score for it, this wonderful theme for it, really, it's great. So the question, are gongs and tam-tams classified musically along with the bells? And I'm assuming that we're talking about like orchestral bells, a glockenspiel. They are all considered percussion instruments, yes, but I'm a percussionist. That's my instrument. That's what I actually play, and almost anything is a percussion instrument. Gongs are, tam-tams are, glockenspiels are, chains are, rocks are, blocks of wood are, anything. So yes, they're in the same family, being percussion instruments, but you have, I guess they're all metallophones. They're all made of metal.
Although in the case of this score, things are notated rather more intricately than just lumping everything in as percussion.
Right.
The gamelan and gong ensemble is sort of notated over 5 or 6 lines in the score.
Right. Well, yeah, the gamelan, even though a lot of people think it's one instrument, as I mentioned earlier, it's an ensemble. It's a family of instruments.
Yep.
And they recorded that separately. Again, you can see some of that in that documentary that we did.
It's an interesting concept that Howard Shore uses in several of his scores, where he has a smaller ensemble surrounded by the orchestra.
Yeah. The Cell has that. The score has that.
You hear and in the Lord of the Rings, you hear that in the Shire. You have the Hobbit band effectively surrounded by the orchestra.
Right.
Hugo as well with the cafe band.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. It's an idea that came out of classical music. They would often have things like a string quartet sit separately, within the orchestra. Even works like Rite of Spring. There's our Arkenstone theme again. We'll have just a few moments for string quartet inside of a full orchestral sound. Wagner was famous for his ring music. Are there any famous dragons in classical music? Well, there's a great dragon in Wagner's Ring, Fafnir, a giant who transforms into a dragon and has some wonderful, terrifying low bass tuba music and things like that. I'm trying to think of other dragons in classical music. Nothing leaps to mind. We need more dragon music, I guess.
The ultimate dragon music, I think, in terms of cinema, before this music here with Howard Shore, would be the original early 80s film Dragon Slayer.
Dragon Slayer with an incredible Alex North score, absolutely.
Which had an Academy Award nomination for Alex North, I was about to say.
Yeah.
a really, really remarkable dragon, Vermithrax, and Sir Ralph Richards, extraordinary performance. And of course, an amazing Alex North score.
Absolutely.
Strangely enough,
Dragons.
Oscar winning, well, Oscar losing, but still, it was
Sure,
still
yeah.
Oscar nominated
Yeah.
dragon music.
There were some wonderful dragons represented in very, very early film scores. Douglas Fairbanks had a dragon in one of his films. I think maybe The Thief of Baghdad, scored by Mortimer Wilson. The Fritz Lang films, the Nibelungen, scored by Gottfried Huppertz, had another amazing dragon in there.
There is a recent re-recording of that available, I think, as well, isn't there?
Of the Huppertz, that's correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
Two very long films. They might even be combined longer than The Hobbit.
I think
Do we think that the opening of China in recent history influenced Smaug's theme? I think Smaug's theme does have a Chinese influence, but I think it supersedes any sort of politics or world events. I think Howard Shore, well, many musicians, and certainly Howard Shore among them, have always been interested in world music. You know, Howard, he was interested in the music from all around the world. Some wonderful bard material here, by the way. You know, back in the Saturday Night Live days, he was loving that sort of stuff. So world music has long been an interest. I think musicians try not to get involved in the politics of all that because they tend to be a little bit more globalist in that sort of thing. Your mileage may vary, but how do we justify using an Asian influence for Smaug when Tolkien wrote it with a more Scandinavian influence? I certainly understand the question, and I think it's one of those things where, well, I can tell you from my own personal experience. Tolkien wrote The Hobbits with a sort of, well, it's more of an English influence than what the music ended up. The music ended up a little more Irish in a lot of ways, certainly within the Hobbit band that Jim was mentioning. But it was the English countryside was Tolkien's concept of the Hobbits. However, as I was lucky enough to sort of travel the world with a lot of these live performances of the Lord of the Rings music, every place I went, someone would pull me aside and say, how did Tolkien understand what life was like for us and depict it in the Hobbits? And I got that in Poland, I got it in Vienna, I got it in England, obviously. I got it in the East Coast of the United States, so I got it in the West Coast of the United States. I got it every single place that these scores went. And I think some of these things, it just reminds you of the power of interpretation. Everybody has a different take on what these characters mean to them. And I think the filmmakers and Howard, to them, Smaug had a sort of Asian influence, partially because it was something that they hadn't quite done yet. You know, you have some Scandinavian influences in the music of Rohan and things like that. So I think it was uncharted territory in a way, and creative license, I suppose. Yeah.
Allegedly, the designs of Guillermo del Toro's version of The Hobbit included some very, very different, and you might even say unorthodox, interesting choices for creature designs. I heard that the dragon that Guillermo del Toro was toying with was designed with a much stronger Eastern Asian influence. And then there's one of my favorite shots with Thorin in profile with the statue of his forefathers. It's a brilliant shot.
Clever, yeah.
Brilliant shot. But then again, there was also the story that Beorn's house was going to get up and walk about town on giant turkey legs like Baba Yaga's house. I heard that all kind of strange things were going to happen in the Del Toro version.
Well, as I say, the power of interpretation.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So yeah, I don't know. Again, there was certainly no politics involved. I don't think the filmmakers or Howard intended to favor one culture or slight one culture or anything like that. I think it was just a matter of what can we do musically that we haven't done yet. And you know, it's not really fair to say that Smaug is presented musically strictly as something out of Chinese culture or something like that, because we have those strong Indonesian influences as well, and the gamelan and all that. So
Hmm.
he's a sort of a hodgepodge creatively, and maybe that's the best way to be. These things aren't from our world; they're not from our Earth or from Middle Earth. So there's some
Yes. Ultimately,
they are their
yes.
own things. Yeah.
Now, all of these orcs running around stealth ninja style on the rooftops of Lake Town. Unexpected.
It's a very quiet feat. Yeah.
Very unexpected for them to be acting so elf-like and stealthy to walk on rooftops without being detected.
So, Jim, you can correct my course here. I've completely lost track of what composition we're in, but I think we had the choral text, "The Dragon," passed us by. Is that correct?
I believe so.
Okay, I was pontificating about
So
influences. Yeah.
we're currently in a liar and a thief.
Okay. Okay, so we do have the choral text, "The Dragon," in this composition. This is another Sindarin text. And it's similar to some of the lines that Bilbo speaks to him. "Truly the old tales fall utterly short. Tales of a fire drake from the north, lean and hungry, driven by greed, by the call of gold, a terrible need." And so it goes.
Indeed. So, it was very interesting to hear the very last of the Shire theme when we were previously at inside information, and to hear the Shire theme disappear, and then for us to wander into a chamber of treasure for several minutes where Howard had a chance to just play with tones and these percussive, weird, echoing sounds. It was really cool.
Yeah.
And now we're in the realm of absolute menace and dire threat at every stage for the rest of the film.
Smaug's music reigns supreme in here, other than the Arkenstone can still overpower it a little bit.
There you go. Hello. I can see the production notes from Peter to Howard. Dear Howard, write angry dragon music. Thank you.
Some of the Angry Dragon music, this is actually a good example of how Howard oversaw the orchestrations.
Yes.
Some of that was written with crazy squealing high trumpet stuff up to like a high F and things like that. And it sounded really cool, but it made Smaug sound like a James Bond bad guy. And that was a great example of Howard coming in and saying, I think we need to look at the range and some of this stuff. It's it's not quite it's cool, but it's not what we want here. So
Wow.
yeah, so
that's great.
Yeah, as Jim said before, he was involved with every step of the process. That's probably a good example of how he oversaw some of these things.
Exactly.
The question is, do the orcs have a theme, or do the orcs not have a theme in The Hobbit because they don't have a home as they do in Lord of the Rings, so they're not as well defined? And yeah, that's pretty accurate. They get some of the Dol Guldur music on occasion, but it doesn't tend to be. This is a quieter, sneakier scene, and those are definitely not quieter, sneakier themes. So I don't think you hear a lot of it in here. But yeah, they don't have that 5-beat pattern like the Uruk-hai have.
I think there's a little more material in film 3, which brings things together.
Yeah, yeah. The orcs are maybe more musically defined in film 3. I'd say, right?
Yeah. I think we're back in the hunters again now.
Right, we're kind of moving back and forth because I think there's a King's foil piece in here too.
Yeah, there's a bunch of material on the album here which isn't in the film as well.
Indeed.
There's a bit of how Legolas is treated musically in these films.
Yeah.
Again, that sort of swift-footed setting of the Woodland Realm material. There's a figure in here that you all recognize from the river sequence as well.
Oh, yes.
I think we called that one just Elvish Warriors, a sort of generic title. The Woodland Realm is sort of in a Phrygian mode, while the Elvish Warriors is in a more standard minor Aeolian type of mode. So you have these sort of modes slamming against one another, which creates some of the depth that Howard uses in these scores. That'll make more sense to musicians. Sorry if you're just a casual fan, that probably made absolutely no sense. I apologize.
No, please get granular. as granular as you want to, gentlemen, please. You, Jim, you're staying up late enough to do so too. So allow yourselves to get into the weeds because the fans love it. They love it, and I do too.
Jim, how's your coffee supply? Are you doing okay?
Yeah. Is there enough there for you?
Is it gone?
It's not completely gone.
Okay.
It's nearly gone.
Is there an iteration of Toriel's theme here? I know you probably mentioned it just a few minutes ago, forgive me, but it is such a strong reflection of the Arwen scene from Fellowship.
That is coming up. Right now you're getting some material that's related to their relationship, her relationship with Keeley. Yes. But yes, you are going to get some of that Toriel stuff.
That is a very good point.
Well said.
Yes. 2 hours and 33 minutes. Thank you, love. There you go.
Oh, actually, here's another question about my obsessiveness. As you were writing the music of the Lord of the Rings films, how did you determine what level of detail to go into when discussing music theory?
That's an excellent question.
Yeah, that is an excellent question. And I wish I had a snappy answer for it. That was a bit of gut instinct when I felt like it was, that's too much. I didn't want the thing to read like an instructional manual. I don't tend to be a big fan of academic writing. I like academic depth and academic material, but not the style of writing that tends to go with that. So I guess I felt if I ever felt I was losing the story in my descriptions, that was probably enough. I had a wonderful friend read through a lot of that for me, John Takis, who is a known name in film music circles. Read a lot of that as I was going through it, and he understands music. He's not a professional musician, but he's a trained musician in his way. But he's also a huge fan of Tolkien, and he would do a wonderful job of saying, I think you've lost the push on all of this. You need to back it up and tell the story a bit more. So he was a great voice, reminding me to not be too much of a nerd if I could help it, which I rarely can, I admit.
And also, this is your daily reminder that the people of Lake Town had the healthiest pigs in all of Middle-earth, because they were consistently fed Athalas. Those were pigs that had no disease. They lived for a long time. It was very happy pigs.
They also have the most comfortable walnuts that can substitute as a pillow if you can't find anything else.
Oh yeah, the walnut pillow.
Yeah.
It's almost like he has a halo of walnuts.
That was the original track title we were going to go with, but it didn't work at all. A halo of walnuts. Yeah. Nobody liked that one.
Gosh, you're funny. You guys are funny. There's a lot of conversation still about whether it's Sindarin or whether it's Quenya that she is speaking, but I'm sure it's Sindarin. It sounds like Cinderin to me.
I don't know. I can tell you that we did title this theme, so this came up in the questions a few times. Why isn't this Arwen's theme? What's going on here? And it was something that was used behind Arwen in Lord of the Rings, but it wasn't sort of a separate device. So we just gave it the title here of Elvish Healing. She does have a recurring theme. You hear it once in Fellowship of the Ring and once in Return of the King, but it's not that figure. It's a vocal line that was different. So I mean, we did not identify it in the book as a specific theme for Arwen, so I don't think that was the intent. I'm sure it's very highly associated with her. Reusing themes like this, especially in a essentially a prequel series, it's a tricky thing. Like we said with Bree, Mithril eventually. Some of these themes that weren't themes became themes, and fans make a lot of assumptions about what the original intent with these things might have been, and then when they find out it's something different, or the filmmakers and composers exercise their right to change the original intent because it wasn't really specifically pinned down. I can understand that people get frustrated with that, but it is what it is. It seems like I'm being dismissive, but I'm really not. It's just, these are creative choices that creative people make, and sometimes we are going to agree with them, sometimes we're not going to agree with them.
Yeah, I think
should the creators acknowledge what the fans have adopted? At the risk of being unpopular, speaking to many fans, no, I don't think so. I think a creative voice needs to be true to itself. And I understand that people are huge fans of things, feel a sense of ownership regarding them. But I think ultimately the creators do own them and have the right to do things with them for better or for worse.
Yeah, I think the fan community also has a habit of overanalyzing things, which is not always healthy.
I think, yeah, online discussions tend to head in interesting directions and sort of build camps where maybe they don't need to be.
Well, not as much in our fandom as it is apparent in Star Wars fandom. I'll just say that.
Sure, and I'm sure there are fandoms that, I don't know. There is some I'm sure are very liberal things. Some are very entrenched with things. It's the nature of fandom. I did. I've never attended any sort of fan convention or anything like that, other than ones that I've been participating in. That wasn't the culture that I grew up with. I wore my little nerdy Star Wars shirts as a 8-year-old like everybody else that were my friends at that point. But it wasn't really my culture. My entrance into all of these things was always orchestral music. So the passions of the fans to me always, I don't think anything's wrong with them, but it's a little foreign to me. That's something that I look at and try to understand how important it is for me to respect that as well. But sometimes I have to work to get myself placed into that mindset because it's just not natural to where I came from. But that's okay. I have the utmost respect for the people that have dedicated many hours to learning about these things.
A wonderful reference to the song at the end of the film. If this is to end in fire, then we shall all burn together. In this film, because they did sing 2 songs, Actually, in the extended edition of An Unexpected Journey, there are three. There are three songs, and maybe 4 or 5 if you add in the Goblin King, the Great Goblin, excuse me. So yeah, there are at least 5 songs in An Unexpected Journey, and I would have enjoyed seeing 1 or 2 in this film. But the closest that we get is Bard's recitation of poetry in Lake Town, I think, and because we big spoilers, because we ultimately do not see the dragon meet his demise in this film, and because we have to wait a whole nother year, well, in terms of theatrical release, the audience had to wait another year to find out what happened with Smaug. There could have been songs all over the place in this movie, but there's too much action and too much plot, too many things happening. Not enough time for songs, it seems.
Yeah, I always feel like the tone between films 2 and 3, they're more connected tonally to one another than they are to film 1. Film 1 is a little bit of a different feel to it.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I think that's by design, I think.
So I think we're coming up to the last major piece of music in the film, which is also the last to be finished.
My Armor is Iron.
Yeah.
Yes.
So the date on the orchestrated composition is December the 12th. And
what was the release date of the film?
Well, I believe the New Zealand premiere was, if I just consult Wikipedia, which may not be accurate, I apologize, was December the 12th.
Okay. Wow, that's
Talk about pushing it.
Yeah.
Pushing it to the absolute minute, the last minute. We all know from those fans who have the extended edition on Blu-ray, and if you watch the appendices, you know how difficult it was for them to get this thing done and wrapped up at the last possible minute, including the very last moments of sound editing, the last possible second they had.
I think these middle stories are often very, very difficult to structure, especially something like this where you have so many different entangled storylines.
Mm-hmm. And the cold furnaces
Legolas
of Erebor.
theme there. Yeah.
Oh yeah, the Legolas theme suddenly shows.
Right.
And then we have to set fire to all this dwarven, heritage, so to speak. We have to ignite the embers of dwarven history, culminating in this wild visual of a molten gold statue of an ancient dwarven king.
This sequence was quite different when I saw it. I think I don't even think this whole well thing was in there, and a lot of the gags with the relighting the furnace and all that were quite different.
Yeah, this was scored. The whole thing was scored at least twice, I think.
Yeah. And even at that, it's edited a bit, quite a bit in this version of the film.
It is. There's more on this in the documentary on the Blu-ray. But for the last piece, the orchestra was recorded section by section, so strings separately, brass, woodwinds, to give them more control over the final mix.
This sequence did originally have score. It's not in the film, it's not on the albums. It's probably just about the biggest passage that doesn't show up. It's never been heard in terms of things that lock into the actual edit of the film. But we do have a score for it, so I described it in the book, but we've never heard it. See, now we kind of fade back in here.
Yeah.
Oh, oh, I'll make those jokes later. But how about this moment of fire? Fire returning to Erebor.
How does no one singe their beard in this sequence?
know.
All that hair and no burning.
I'm getting Alien 3 and Attack of the Clones vibes here.
Well, you're more
Little
right
bit.
than you know with Attack of the Clones, because isn't there a conveyor belt sequence in Attack of the Clones? And there was originally a conveyor belt sequence in here. Yeah.
Yeah, conveyor belt with these mining carts trottling along. Exactly so.
Well,
And-
there was a different version of it where there were sort of statue dwarfs with giant hammers, and they kind of beat them down rhythmically as Bilbo tried to avoid them. And
God.
the music that was under that is still in here. It's just repurposed for different action.
Okay.
But yeah, that was part of the design for this sequence. The melting statue at the end of this too, again, not to be too spoilery, but I'm sure people know. The melting statue is another one of those ones where it was very hard to find the right tone for scoring that, similar to the comedy beat of Bilbo fainting in Bag End way back before the journey began. They had a hard time finding a way to represent the statue melting musically without it being sort of comedic.
I think like Bilbo fainting, there isn't actually any music there at all.
Right, and I think that was the solution. Just pull it out. Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm. Indeed.
So we're kind of coming in and out musically here, but it's all really parts of the same composition.
It is. So I think the album has a version from probably middle of October.
Yeah, right. It would have to. That's when everything was locked. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a lot of geonosis going on right here. Yeah.
Yes.
I agree. And soon, according to these visual clues, we will have molten gold. How long does it take gold to melt? I have to look that up. Excuse me.
We'll assume that the fire is abnormally hot.
It's dragon fire, after all.
Yeah, exactly.
We can only assume that dwarves have flame-proof hair and beards.
I think we have evidence, yeah.
Okay.
No, okay, yeah. Aaron, in the live chat, Aaron says that Nori's beard gets singed a bit when he saves Thorin.
Oh, no.
Good catch. Okay. So there's some singeing going on.
Okay, all right, well.
Oh, look at all that. Liquid gold. And I had never in my wildest dreams imagined that we would be having this wild action sequence here in the halls of Erebor with, of all things, it's about to happen.
Yeah, it's one of those storytelling things. Like, I'm sure they needed a beat on the end of this film once they decided that the destruction of Lake Town was the beginning of the next film.
But
so if you're going to leave Smaug alive, you have to have something climactic at the end of this thing. So yeah,
I've made so many jokes over the years about Thorin and his heroic wheelbarrow, and here it is.
I appreciate that they gave it a sort of dwarvish design, though. It's a very angular wheelbarrow.
It is, but he's gonna go body surfing on molten gold. And
what's the wheelbarrow made out of? Why doesn't that melt?
Heroism. That wheelbarrow.
His wheelbarrow is made of heroism?
Made of pure dwarven heroism.
That's
what
that
I can't argue that.
Made
of. Okay. I just can't get enough of how cockamamie this stuff is. Sometimes it's just so funny. Oh, there he goes, floating away.
Yeah, I think this was
the tide.
The other conveyor belt sequence was someplace in here, I think.
I love this stuff so much. Even though I poke fun about it, I love it so much.
Yeah, this is the conveyor belt. That's where it would have been. Instead, he just
Okay.
slides down a thing.
Now it's this is a rather spooky and interesting chamber. This chamber of dwarven banners, and
It's the
here it
throne
comes.
room, right? Or at least close to the throne room?
Is it? No, it's not the throne room at all.
Oh,
As
I thought
shown
it was
in
nearby. Okay.
the prelude of, oh, look at the giant fabrics collapsing. This is kind of cool. I think that the giant tapestries are crazy cool.
Yeah.
And the dragon is more interested in being spiteful than he is in playing it smart. And this is where his ego gets in the way for Smaug, really.
Yeah. So this is all sort of huge statements of Smaug the Terrible, Smaug the Magnificent, the Furnace Chords, all this, this, you know, both beautiful and menacing Smaug material is sort of given some climactic statements, although it also has similarly scoped statements in the beginning of the next film. So
Yes. What are those instruments that carry that dark two tones in the background? The What are those instruments?
I think it's just divided strings. Again, I'm only listening in one side of my head right now, but I think it's one of those things like we talked about last time, where Howard will write to have the section of a string section, everybody on a different pitch. So he divided strings, the low strings, the cellos and the basses, divided them three ways each into these very dark chords.
Yes.
Basses down to that range are very rarely written in harmony like that, where it's that close harmony, and it creates a really heavy, almost suffocating type of sound down there.
Indeed. Indeed it does. My captions on my Blu-ray said, parenthesis, yells in Dwarvish, close parenthesis. I wish I knew what it was that David Sallow had written.
Yeah,
I really wish.
I'm sure he has it all somewhere.
Wow. Hello. Is that Thror? That's actually Thror.
Yeah.
King under the mountain.
Must have commissioned it.
It's funny that Smaug had been there for so long and had never known this was there.
He's been asleep for 60 years, right?
Indeed. Liquid destruction coming at you.
How many discussions do you think they had about which part of the face would melt first? Because that could have been quite funny.
True.
You know, they could have been inadvertently humorous.
Just the physics of molten gold are on pure display right now. It's fantastic.
So they tried with things like having the entire orchestra sort of bend their pitch downwards and create a sort of melting sound. But as we were saying earlier, it seemed like the subtlest solution was just let the sound effects carry that. Don't do that musically.
Yes. Unburned, this golden dragon bursts from the sealed gate of Erebor. It's physically insane. It's the most gorgeous, crazy thing. Speckles of gold everywhere. Wow.
It's a good dragon design. And we are back to the big, again, the final statements. This is an incredible choral bit, which I think, Jim, is this choral writing is different on the album, right?
It is, ever so slightly, yeah.
Yeah, and I think it sort of combines all his materials, thematic bits into a kind of unified statement, but very dissonant and very almost like a choral fanfare in a way.
Yeah. The film takes it out slightly early.
Yeah.
The album has a slightly beefier ending.
And again, we're singing the text to the dragon.
And
and cut to black. So,
And this is your 10-second Ed Sheeran warning.
This song is still quite popular with the
actually
young people.
I'll tell you a funny story about this extraordinary song. I went on a journey to Sweden years ago. I think it was only about less than a year after the release of this film. And I was taking the train across town to the suburbs with my friend. And quite randomly, 3 young men in their late teens, early 20s were just together relaxing and laughing. And then spontaneously, one of them, with a beautiful singing voice, breaks out into this Ed Sheeran song, singing on the train in English, not in Swedish, singing this beautiful song. And I actually joined up and sang with them completely randomly. It came out of nowhere. Nowhere. So there are people around the world who really enjoyed this song. This is extraordinary. We've just been through so much with the introduction of so much music, and the thickening layers of drama into the tapestry of the music itself. And here we are. The dragon is still not dead.
It's true.
Good question.
So the question is, does Howard Shore have any responsibility in terms of choosing the end credits artists, or any responsibility in terms of working that material into his score? If it's a situation where he's doing the song like he did in Lord of the Rings, yes, it's something that he's involved with and treats as anything else he composes. Something like this, I think they contacted Ed Sheeran fairly late into the production. I think this was recorded fairly late on, and I don't think there was any connection to the people working on the score. So no, there's no material in common, anything like that.
In the YouTube chat, we've been informed that PJ's daughter, Katie, really, really liked Ed Sheeran, and that seems to have been...
She made the recommendation, I believe, right? Yeah. Yeah. So no, there's no Ed Sheeran quotes in the score, but stands on its own.
At least he didn't show up for an awkward cameo like he did in Game of Thrones. Thank God.
You didn't like his acting?
I don't need to remind anybody of anything. Well, you guys, what an accomplishment, and yet how crazy that the production pushed them. Now, for those fans who are not familiar, Doug, can you tell us a little bit about what was so ass backwards in the way that sudden changes came to post-production and for the music being done on time for this score?
Well, I mean, we got into this a little bit last time, but in filmmaking is now a digital process. There used to be a physical process of cutting films, like literally cutting films. It wasn't just a turn of phrase as it is now. So things took a lot longer when you're dealing with physical film and all that sort of thing. As things are digitally edited and effects are coming in, at the last seconds, and you can move this here, you can move that there. It shrinks the entire post-production window and creates a very non-linear process. And this isn't something saying like, well, production was a mess and things weren't being done well. It's the nature of filmmaking these days, and it has been for quite some time.
It is. I think this sort of first started becoming apparent in these early 2000s. The Star Wars prequels are probably very good examples of this. Attack of the Clones in particular, where you have a scenario where John Williams is recording in January for a film that's coming out in May, and the film is still being edited right down to the wire. So
when did Avid editing get so popular? I mean, it was coming around the 90s a bit, wasn't it?
It was, yeah, sort of mid to late 90s.
Yeah. Avid is the system
really
that
took off
digital
early
editing
2000s.
is usually done on. So yeah, for a giant project like this, where it was very special effects heavy. And you just have the pure logistics of things happening in different continents and different time zones and things like that. It's complicated. These things are hard to do.
And in addition, there was a sudden change from a 2-film to a 3-film structure.
Right. Yeah.
As we know, that was another major factor in how things got a little weird with this production.
Yeah, it's tricky. It's tricky. This was probably, out of the Hobbit films, though, the one that was the most linear and probably the easiest. And it's a very subjective phrase here, but probably the easiest to do, because there was a good portion of the material up front that was already written in some form. Some of the themes were already sorted out.
Yes.
There was a head start on it that way. It was something that flowed along. The last act certainly jumped around a bit in terms of, now this scene is here, now this scene is here, but much of it kind of stayed the way that they envisioned it. So it went fairly smoothly. And as I said, my personal memories of working on this one are the warmest and most golden, I think, because it was the longest time I got to spend on any of these films because of all the home video release material that we did afterwards. I was there in October to work on the liner notes. I was back there in November to film stuff for Peter Jackson's video blogs. Howard and I went off to Switzerland to work on something else later that spring. Then we got together in May in New York again to do some filming. And then I did more filming in Los Angeles after that. So, compared to something like Battle of the Five Armies, where it was like you were in and you're out, and it was a very intense period of time, Smaug we got to live with a little bit. It was most like Lord of the Rings in that way. It was something that we really got to, wade in for a bit. And I think I probably have particularly fond memories of, or at least a particular fondness for some of the material. Sorry, I've been talking for 3 hours. But fondness for the material in the score because of that. Things like the Lake Town theme and the Smaug theme, even though I know Smaug really was written around the time of Unexpected Journey. But these are things that I have a huge fondness for, and really great memories of being involved with all that. The question is, what was different between this as a film too and the Two Towers as a film too? Is that accurate? That's kind of what you're wondering. The Two Towers. Jim talked about this last week, but the Lord of the Rings, the structure was more locked in because you had a book that was essentially what they were making. These were based on a book, but they brought in a lot of extra material, and they deviated from the structure of the book and added characters and things like that. So because of that, the production was paced differently. There were more decisions happening later just because they were finding things a little bit more. Lord of the Rings, they had a pretty locked in roadmap of things. So that affected the way the production went.
Yeah, I mean, Two Towers, from a scoring perspective, a lot of it was scored out of order. So Howard Shore was just writing for whatever was ready at the time, and the film was always in a little bit of a state of flux with scenes moving from Two Towers into Return of the King.
Two Towers is actually the most rushed, or at least kind of, I don't know. The production was a little tricky on the Two Towers because they had spent so much time an awards season for Fellowship, and none of them were really expecting that. So when they got into the year after, the spring or the late winter after Fellowship, they were all kind of busy with this stuff, and they got to the Oscars and all looked at each other and said, "Oh, we've got to do another one of these. Like our time is running out." So actually, Two Towers was a bit of a challenge from that point of view.
We should probably just point out that we're currently in the middle of a very lengthy end credits suite as well, which is a new thing for these films.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. how can people support the release of hopefully the music of the Hobbit films book and the release of complete recordings? Please just keep mentioning things in social media if you'd be so kind. We kind of talked about it earlier, but Tolkien properties should have a little bit of a resurgence here in terms of the public's eye with Amazon doing all that they're doing. So, keep these things warmly regarded if that's something that you want to see.
Yeah, keep
Mention
talking.
them. Keep talking,
Absolutely. Absolutely, yes. And keep talking about it in discussion without yelling at people. Yes, as you said earlier, Doug.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
I want to say thank you to you guys being with us for 3 hours and 6 minutes of beautiful, beautiful exploration of this music and very enriching conversation. This is an audience which is so loyal because they love Howard Shore as much as we all do. And I'm telling you, our producer had asked us appropriately in our ears, how much should we expect Howard Shore's music or any of his themes to appear in the future, possibly, in Amazon Studios' upcoming second Age of Middle-earth series called the Lord of the Rings series. And we still don't know. We wonder, and as we know, we can still report that no one has approached Howard yet. Correct? That we know.
I couldn't comment.
You don't know. See, you couldn't comment. We don't know. We don't know if anybody has approached him yet. So the answer is we don't know. But at least all the fans feel the same way. Our attachment to Middle Earth is musical as much as it is visual. So if Howard Shore's music is not present at all in the new Amazon series, everyone will feel the absence of it, the incredible absence of it. That's the way it is. Really.
That might be something nice for people to keep in the conversation as well. If it is important
Indeed.
to the fans of these properties that the music carry on.
Yes,
Yeah.
good. The fans they're talking about it all the time.
I am sure that someone at Amazon is thinking about this.
Oh,
and I can tell you from personal experience, the people in positions of creativity and positions of power do monitor these things.
Indeed.
Which is all the more reason to not be silly on social media. Say nice things, but people do pay attention. People do read these things.
The last question from our live chat from Drew asking, does the extended edition credits have any unreleased music, which we just finished watching?
For Smaug, no.
No. The answer is no.
The suite at the end is called Beyond the Forest and is the last track on the album.
Excellent. And there we have it. I can predict everyone join us next week. We'll be doing this again. We will be watching the third film in the Hobbit trilogy. It is the extended edition of the Battle of the Five Armies. The one, as they say, quite surprisingly, turned a children's book from the 1930s into an R-rated film. So we have something to look forward to next week, gentlemen. That is Jim Ware right there, and that is Douglas Adams right there. And you guys are so extraordinary. Thank you for all of your time, for joining us. Any last thoughts?
It's always a pleasure. Hope we didn't get off the beaten path quite too much. We do sometimes, but these are scores that mean a lot to us. It's a very strange thing to love both the art and the artist firsthand, and it's wonderful to be able to experience these things with everybody. So thanks for sitting through all of our blabbing.
Yep. And from me, thanks for listening. And if you do want to read Doug's book, and if you do want Hobbit complete recordings, and if you do want a Hobbit rarities archive, please say so loudly and publicly.
Yeah, say so on all the social media platforms. We are at the One Ring Net on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and beyond. This gentleman is at Doug Adams Music. And you, Jim, you're at Jim J. Ware, is that right?
That is correct.
That's right.
Don't do Jim Ware. It's a shark scientist, and we constantly tag him with things and confuse the poor man. So Jim J. Ware, please.
Yeah. We did call him Beardy Jim Ware at one point, but now we're both Beardy Jim Ware.
That's fun. You guys are extraordinary. You can follow myself and my mischief at QuickBeam2000. I want to say thank you to the audience, and a very big thank you to Mission Control, who has been silently in our ears. Thank you, Justin, our producer and director behind the scenes, and to the worldwide audience of Tolkien fans. Thank you for staying up late with us throughout all the worldwide time zones. Stay safe, stay healthy, and we will see you all next Tuesday, again, for a special deep dive into Howard Shore's music of The Hobbit, the Battle of the Five Armies Extended Edition, right here on the OneRing.net. Until then, buenas noches y buena suerte. Good night and good luck.